back to another edition of Dash Dan's Sporting Adventures, and we're actually delving into the life of the man himself, Dan Lonergan. We've completed part one. We've gone through his childhood, his love of the Bulldogs growing up, also his start in broadcasting, both in a regional sense and in a metropolitan sense, calling the footy, calling various types of sport. And Dan is now at a stage in the late 90s where he's making the move over to Perth for a big full-time job, position that's been certainly taken up by a lot of legendary broadcasters in the years past. We do this for KISS Professional Solutions, who are very, very good supporters of the podcast. They service all of Melbourne, Sydney, Gippsland, Shepparton and Albury. They have a local business based in Carrum Downs, and they service Wagga from their Albury office as well. Dan, we're up to part two already, and we're up to your stage in Perth. So you spoke in part number one about the lead up to making the move over across the Nullarbor. Can you tell us about your first movements to Perth, actually adjusting to a different sporting market, and the fact that there was probably, I'm sure, a bit of internal pressure that you put on yourself too, because it was a big job, been taken up by a lot of fantastic broadcasters in the past in a sportsman city. How did you go in the early years, or the early days rather, in Perth?
Well, I was on a hiding to nothing day, mate. Great to be with you once again. Thanks for having me. Because the great Clinton Grivis, the late great Clinton Grivis, had the gig, and then he went back to Melbourne to take over ABC TV and also call Friday Night Footy because Peter G was going down to Tasmania to read the news. Ali had been the reader down there and she wasn't comfortable, and she went back to Perth to read weekends. So Peter went down there, and there was a bit of a shuffling of the deck chairs, if you like, and it wasn't a job for me in Melbourne, but there was a job in Perth, considering I called AFL, so I headed over there. My partner Jody stayed in Melbourne, so it was a long-distance relationship. I remember, and a couple of guys said when I got there after a couple of weeks, gee, Dan, it's warm this time of the year anyway, probably compared to Melbourne. I said, oh, March is not bad in Melbourne. They said, oh, it's hot. It was stinking hot. It was really, really hot March going into April. It would have been high 20s, early 30s. You turn up at the footy in shorts, and the first week I was there was the Shield final. WA had played in the previous two and just lost in 95, 96 when South Australia hosted and managed to hang on for a draw. They were very lucky. The next year, WA were the best team all year and had a shocker in the final. Queensland won. This year they were hosting again against a pretty good, pretty experienced Tasmanian side. And this demo is just before all the very good players became permanent members of the Test side. Adam Gilchrist, Justin Langer, Damian Martin, even Tom Moody got back in the one-day side. Michael Hussey, Ryan Campbell was a very aggressive opening bat at the top of the order. Simon Kadich was starting to make it. Brendan Julian, Joe Angel, very, very good side. And as I say, Tassie had Jamie Cox, Michael Divenuto played a bit of one-day cricket, Sean Young, Dean Hills, the veteran David Boone, Rodney Tucker, Mark Ridgway and Colin Miller, who'd taken over 70 wickets that year, Mark Atkinson, the keeper, and a young Ben Target. So it was two excellent sides. They both deserved to be there. Stuart Saunders and Peter Walsh came over to join us. It was my first real crack at calling cricket. I'd called a little bit for the ABC in Melbourne during Grandstand when they'd crossed out to us, but not much. So I was a bit nervous, and it took me a little while to sort of settle in. Glenn's a great cricket commentator. Walsh, he has his own style. He's a good cricket commentator, and I know what a great bloke Terry Alderman is. I met Terry a few times anyway, and Bob Massey's pretty intense. It was good working with him, and then you had Lance Catchpole, like a lot of, and I mean, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, Damian, but Lance Catchpole's like a lot of scorers, think they know plenty, and he liked to put his nose in about what I needed to know and what I should know. He needed to be a bit like the Camerons, the incomparable Jack Cameron and his son Jared, who just did the job, and they were seen but not heard, and that was a bit off-putting. But look, it was a terrific final. It was great to be there. I learned a lot. I knew I had a long way to go in my cricket, but WA eventually, third time lucky, got the job done. Brendan Julian made a big 100 on Saturday afternoon when the Fremantle doctor came up. He just went berserk. Ryan Campbell got a dashing 100 at the start. Tom Moody, Jamie Cox got a very good 100 in the first innings. One of the more unlucky players not to play for Australia. And Michael Divenuto, who'd had a very good year where he'd also played one-day cricket for Australia, was outstanding in at least making WA bat again in the second innings. But it was a good way to kick it all off, and I knew how parochial they were over there. They absolutely love their local teams, probably more than international sport. That's shown by the big crowds they've been getting for the Perth Scorchers and the BBL, not just this year, but past year. So, look, it was an interesting experience. Good to be there, and I knew that I wouldn't be wearing jumpers too often. It was always pretty warm and mild.
I can imagine. Now, tell us about your time calling footy over there. So you were there from memory from the start of '98 until the back end of 2000, Dan. It was an interesting, probably a transitional time when it comes to the two footy teams over there, the West Coast Eagles and the Fremantle Dockers. I mean, the Eagles were such a force throughout the 1990s, and a lot of their players started to peter out, and a lot of the veterans probably weren't as strong as they used to be, and the performances eventually went on a bit of a decline during that period. And Fremantle was sort of in the fledgling part of their early years where they struggled. They finally made a breakthrough in 1999, defeating the West Coast Eagles for the first time. It took them almost 5 years to win their first Western Derby. You would have called quite a few over the years. But before we get to that, tell us about the first game you called over there and how nervous you were.
Well, the first game was round two. Round one, I didn't call because I had to do cricket updates. It was the Test series in India that Australia was involved in. And I had to do cricket updates. Tim Lane and Jim Maxwell were over there for grandstand. So Wally Foreman called with Glenn. And then I called Collingwood and West Coast on a Friday night. It wasn't a great call. I was a bit nervous. And I noticed when I called my first ever game, Damo, I think I might have mentioned that last week for the ABC. The previous year was out at Princes Park when the Bulldogs got beaten narrowly at the end. A great mark by Winston Abraham, then playing for Fremantle. This year he crossed over to North Melbourne in '98, and my voice, I lost it in the third quarter, and there was no reason to lose it because it wasn't one of those games where the tempo was up, really, even though West Coast have got a huge supporter base. Yeah. I think, overused my voice, and I think it had a lot to do with being nervous and very tense. And I had some work to do on that. And I was concerned that this could be something that might plague me. But I was okay the next day doing a waffle. But again, it was a reasonable standard, good standard, but it probably wasn't as intense as AFL. And then the next week was the Western Derby, as they called it over there. And I actually called, I thought, reasonably well. And I started to get into the stride. I thought, okay, I've got over the nerves of the first game. I think Glenn was a bit nervous. I mean, you got to remember when you've got someone like Clinton who everything he does turns to gold. He's just one of those special talents. And then you have me who was battling. Was I going to make it? And they could understand that. And I don't think they'd properly settle on me to be the permanent replacement, which I didn't know at the time. And I thought, wow. I think they thought if someone else came along that might have been better and more experienced, and that's probably fair enough, that they may go down that path or they may advertise the job. Now, that would have been, I don't know how I would have survived that if I didn't get the job full time. But in the end, they felt because Neville Oliver left during the process of me going over to Perth and Clinton coming back and Peter G going down to Tassie, that they, in the end, and I've moved my life over there, that they really had to give me the job. But lucky that the footy season was underway and I was just starting to find my way and work it all out and become a better caller and slow down and more pausation and reach the level that Glenn needed me to reach. And by about the halfway mark of the season, he said, you're going well. He said, you're calling well. You've got the hang of it, which was very important to do that, knowing what a great commentator he was and that excellence was just something you had to reach for someone like Glenn Mitchell, and you had to virtually be perfect in everything you did. And I was certainly striving to do that.
Do you feel in these early days, Dan, that you were mentored? I mean, probably times are a bit different, aren't they? Where for younger people, they expect a bit more love rather than tough love, shall we say. It was probably a little bit different back 25 to 30 years ago. When it came to mentoring, do you feel that you got the right kind of mentoring?
I think I did from Peter Booth. I thought Peter Booth was outstanding. not so much from Tim, but that was just Tim's personality. Tim, again, expected you to be brilliant. I think Tim thought I was an outstanding broadcaster, and that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, broadcasting is a subjective view.
Correct.
You have a view on whether someone can do it. I think we can all do it. If we go out there and we're broadcasting AFL footy, we can all do it. It's just the level of how we do it and whether we're at the higher level, the middle level, or the lower level. But if you're doing it, whether it be local football or AFL footy, which we all strive to do, you know how to give a score, tell the people who's got the footy, player ID, keeping up with the play, have the right levels of excitement. If you don't have a great voice, there's not much you can do about that. But those that are absolutely outstanding are the Dennis Comettis who just capture the moment. The Bruce McAvaney's with his excitement and his ability to pull out a stat at the right time. Tim Lane with his use of the English language. Those sort of callers. Clinton Grivis, always with the excitement and that American style that he has, which, I mean, I was watching a bit of the American footy the other day and Clinton came into my mind. I thought, so Clinton. And I mean, he just adopted that probably because of the basketball that he used to call as a young fella.
Correct.
So that's, I mean, at the end of the day, we all do it. And look, Glenn didn't give me much in regard to positive feedback because he didn't get it from George. George Griliasic didn't give it. George Griliasic was a cantankerous, grumpy individual, but he's a good broadcaster. He just expected you to reach a level. If you didn't reach a level, he wouldn't have you on. You put the big paw in front, turn your microphone off and call and say, your pausation's all right, your calling's okay, but you don't know the players. You're not calling. And that was it. I mean, that's not going to help the individual, certainly in the short term, in regard to their confidence to get any better. Wally Foreman was an outstanding mentor for me because he was positive. My cricket, as I said, wasn't great early, and I called a game, a second year there. It was Victoria, WA. Victoria just got beaten. Warren was run out. And I thought, I'm not sure how well that run out went. Glenn said that run out was terrible, Daniel. Bob Massey the same. Lance the same. I don't worry about Lance too much because he's not the broadcaster. And I was pretty forlorn and disappointed. Wally rang me and he said, Daniel, I heard that call. I've spoken to Glenn. It's okay. I think we could do a bit better, don't you? I said, yes, I think I can. Well, we'll come out to Waste where he worked, and I went out there and we sat down for an hour. I had a tape and we listened to it and we stopped it. What could you do better? You seem a bit unsure. Why are you unsure? You're nervous. It was just, and I felt 10 feet tall. So I think that the mentoring is better now. But I even worked with a guy called Lee Simon, who I love working with. But if you didn't hear from Lee, it meant you were going well. I never heard from Lee with my calling, so I presumed I was going well. I mean, I remember my first call at Triple M. I know I'm going well forward here, don't I? But I called a practice match, Richmond and Bulldogs, 2015, knowing I was leaving the ABC. And they wanted me to call their Sydney matches, but they wanted me to get a game under my belt out of the Whitton Oval. Luke Beveridge's first ever game as coach. Liver did his knee. And Evan Giles was obviously the producer, and he said to me, "You're going well. You're going well." And I said, "Any other comments from the big fella, from the boss?" Not really. He just wanted to know when we're finishing. So I just presumed to myself everything was going well. You would have loved him to have said you're going well because I love validation. But then again, sometimes I struggle with it if there's too much of it, if you know what I mean. Validation's a big word in the mental health space, as you know, Damian. But to answer your question, I think that there's more mentoring now, but I still think there's a lot of you've got to go in and do it yourself. We're all striving for the same thing. If you can do it, go and do it. But I still believe that if you are a manager of someone, you should be saying, that was great, well done. Come and have a 5-minute chat or a coffee. You're outstanding on the weekend. Keep working on it. And if things aren't so good, try and be positive. Well, look, not your best day on the weekend. Why do you think that was? Was there a reason? Can we make things better for you so you can reach your level that I know you can reach? So to answer your question again in a long way, I think that the mentoring is a lot different nowadays, and it needs to be because I think we are a much different generation, and particularly the younger generation. They expect to be, and look, I don't mean this unfairly, mollycoddled more than our generation. And I always found rejection very hard, and I still find it hard, and it's been a big cause of my mental health. But just a bit more positivity would certainly help.
Yeah, I think it's still something that can be worked on in the media, the level of feedback, because, particularly for younger people, you don't really, maybe there is that greater need for validation in the younger generation, but the same time, when you're young, you don't know if you're going well, and I think it's natural to have insecurities in the thinking, well, am I going well? Am I good enough? Once you get that confidence and once you have a bit of experience under your belt, you don't need the validation as much anymore. So I think it's important to mentor younger people. I would agree with that.
The older
Listening to
guys,
Dashing Dan Sporting, yeah,
yeah.
go.
Sorry, Damo. Before you mention that, I mean, the older guys would say, well, if I'm going all right, and then I'm still, I mean, for me, I knew I was going all right if I was on the roster the next week, even if you weren't sure you were going all right, but you were going all right because at the end of the day, you're at the whim of the managers. Didn't matter what you thought, how you were going. It was what they thought. If they kept putting you on the list, oh, well, I'm going okay. So you just keep going, I suppose. But yeah, look, I certainly agree with what you're saying, no doubt.
Listening to Dashing Dan Sporting Adventures. Dan, what about some of the memorable matches? I was talking about the position Freo and West Coast were in before in that time. There were a couple of memorable derbies. What are some of the more memorable matches you called in your time in Perth?
I'll never forget the day when Adrian Fletcher kicked the ball and Peter Carey marked it. It was against St Kilda.
Yes.
Yes. Look, it wasn't the greatest game of footy, but it's always remembered for that. I mean, Adrian Fletcher had the ball in the string. He was an outstanding pickup for Freo. I think people forget what a good player he was. He was an outstanding player. And I know Brisbane got him because he played the most games there. Brisbane got his son, that is Jasper. And gee, Freo would love to have him, wouldn't he? And Geelong would have loved to have got another 70 or 80 games out of Fletcher and even St Kilda. One of those four clubs, if he played more than he played at Brisbane, they all get Jasper Fletcher. But Adrian was a terrific player. But I remember the day he kicked the Peter Carey and we all just stopped and watched. And Freo had the footy and the crowd were annoyed because they said, well, we're in possession. We should at least get a free kick. Should at least be given to us because Adrian Fletcher had it. And Peter Carey got in the road. There were obviously the derbies, the big fight back by Freo and the first one of 99 under Damian Drum.
Yeah.
And they almost got over the line. The one where they blew West Coast away. West Coast had won their first 6 that year. They won 8 of their first 10, 11 of their first 14. And just before that game, they got beaten by the Fremantle Dockers, who were outstanding. It was as good as they played, probably under Damian Drum. It was an outstanding performance. And Tony Modric kicked 6. He kicked an outstanding goal in the pocket on the run. They were brilliant that day and thoroughly deserved their win. And I think it just indicated that West Coast were at the end of their tether with Mick Malthouse. The rest of that season, they struggled. They had a memorable win against the Bulldogs, who were terrible and awfully wasteful that night in windy conditions at the MCG. I think they kicked about 18 or 20 out of bounds on the full. I always remember Mick being in the box going mad almost.
Yeah.
Well, he was sort of over the top, really, the way that he was trying to pace himself in that very small box in front of the members, and they got over the line and won that final, and probably should have had the next final in Perth, would have under the current system, and then played Carlton and got beaten, and that was it. And then he made his way to Collingwood, which was the worst kept secret. But that was a terrific win by Freo. There was a match later that season where Guy McKenna called for a count at West Coast at the end of the 99 season. Yep. They were really in bad form, and Spider Everett played as well as I've ever seen him play. We know what a good player Spider can be, but gee, when he was on, he was as sublime as anyone. He was destroying West Coast on his own, and you can imagine why Guy McKenna's called for a count because his team's going that badly. I mean, they were going awfully. And I always remember from a Bulldogs perspective, early in 1998, the Dogs had won 8 of their first 9, were playing really, really well and destroyed West Coast in the first quarter. And I thought, this might be the year here. But, of course, another false dawn. And West Coast at the Wacker got the crowd on their side. It was good ground to call from the Wacker because you were high up. It was a big ground too. And it was a big commentary box. And the West Coast were outstanding in the last 3 quarters of that game to get the job done. The one, though, that stands out has to be 2000, the second derby of that year. The first one, Scotty Cummins kicked 10. West Coast obliterated Fremantle. Later in the year, they were on top again. Ken Judge was their coach, but they weren't having a great year. And then Freo fought back And talking of fighting back, Dale Kickett and Phil Reid were, well, it's like they were at Festival Hall, Damian. They were throwing punches left, right, and centre, and it got right out of control. I thought it was going to get a lot worse than it did. And I think it probably affected West Coast, who were good early with Phil Matera kicking goals left, right, and centre. And then Clive Waterhouse, who Docker supporters love to love and love to hate, kicked 7. And they got over the line, even though Darren Glass, playing, I think, his first game and became one of the best fullbacks in the comp, was playing up forward, had a chance to win it for West Coast. So that was a very memorable game, big crowd. It's one of the very few occasions when you actually felt like it was Essendon and Collingwood, or Collingwood and Carlton at the MCG, or one of those games, or those two teams playing, because the crowd was virtually even. They were firing up at each other. They were baying for blood, and it was just a magnificent atmosphere.
Now, just before we leave your time in Perth, you mentioned Mick Malthouse before. Everyone seems to have a Mick story who works in the press, and you have one in particular from your early days in Perth, Dan. And I think you ended up having a mutual respect for one another, didn't you, by the end?
Well, by the end of my time in Perth, we did. Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing him at a function. And I went up and said, I wish you all the best, Mick. He said, oh, you're the young bloke from Melbourne, aren't you? I said, oh, I've been here a couple of years now, Mick. He said, how have you found it? I said, oh, look, it's difficult. I miss my family. My father's ill with cancer, and, that'd be very tough. We're going back because our parents, I think, would be a bit older than your son, wouldn't they? I said, oh, yeah, my dad's 61-year-old. Mine are in their 80s, and my wife Nanette's getting on a bit too, but we're going back for that. And I said, coaching? And he smiled. I knew where he was going. It was the worst kept secret. So, look, it was quite a good conversation. He was friendly enough because I suppose I made the effort to go up and say g'day. I was nervous because he could be prickly. Anyway, earlier in the year, it was the Fremantle West Coast Derby. And I keep saying Derby because that's what they call it in WA. It's Derby over here, of course. Old habits die hard, don't they? And it was round 3. Yeah. And as I said a bit earlier, I called okay. And I've gone down to get an interview, and I did, from the West Coast rooms, and then I was told to go to the press conference. And as I've walked in, you've got some of the great WA journos who've been around forever. Kim Hadgorn, who played one state game for WA in the cricket during World Series cricket in 77, 78, and Ray Wilson and Johnny McGrath and Russell Reid and Digby Beecham. So Mark Duffield, I think, was there. So some Scotty Coughlin, some really good guys and excellent journalists as well. And they said, here's the new boy from Perth. Gary Stocks was another one. He said, here's the new boy from Perth. You'll ask the first question. I said, no, I'm not. Give me a chance, boys, will you? Maybe in a few weeks' time, when I've had a chance to work out the lie of the land, I will. So anyway, I sat there and I waited. He was pretty prickly. They'd had a good win, but he's pretty prickly. And I thought, gee, he's been with these guys too long. He's sick of them. And I thought, I'll ask a question about Michael Gardner. I reckon that'll be a nice Dorothy Dixer. It'll be a nice full toss and things will go well. So anyway, I said, Mick, Michael Gardner, number 1 draft pick, 1996, second season. Do you think I thought he played quite well today, for what it's worth. Do you think he belongs now? And he stopped and looked, and I could see, looking to my right, Ray Wilson and Haggers, and they were sort of shaking their head in approval. Thought, that's not a bad question. Well, I think that's what I thought they were thinking. And anyway, he said, belong. This is his second year. He's a number 1 draft pick. Belong. If he didn't belong, he wouldn't be playing. Of course he belonged. And he got up and walked out. And then Ray and Haggers and Stocksy and all those boys came over and patted me on the back. Said, oh, gee, Dan, that wasn't a bad question. Welcome to a Mick Malthouse press conference. And I thought, well, I mean, you're a journo, you're a broadcaster. What do you think? I thought it wasn't a bad question, but he found a way to make it a negative one.
Even you always used to have a go at the term "come to play." What did that term mean?
That was I'll never forget that. I went to that press conference when I was that was, I think, in 2005. Jared had taken over as the number 1 call. We had a show on a Sunday afternoon. It was a review show he did from the studio, good show. And he used to come to us back at the ground. We'd call the game, and Collingwood weren't going well, having a pretty ordinary year. And he didn't like the treatment that Tarrant received, but someone asked a question about come to play. Jared had a day off. He wasn't working this day, and Tim Lane filled in for him, was hosting the show. And then he's got stuck into the umpires. And Tim couldn't believe that. He just sort of said, he said to me later on, well done on getting that, because they ended up sort of letting a few news stories. That particular grab, certainly on the ABC, and we had it on the ABC News and everything like that. And I think we might have been the first footy show to actually have it as well. And he said, wow. And Tim fired up and said it was a disgrace what he said. But you're right, said, did you come to play today, Mick? Come to play what? Marbles. What do you think? And he just shook his head, and I thought, oh, dear, this press conference is just going to go from bad to worse. It just got worse when he started getting stuck into the umpires. Yeah, he's an interesting man, Mick, but he does a good job on the ABC now, and I reckon he's sort of mellowed the older he's got. And even when he interviews some of the great players, a bit like David Park, and he interviewed Marcus Bontempelli last year after he virtually beat Collingwood on his own, and he was in awe of talking to him. And I think that he's just mellowed the older he's got, and I think the ABC is the right place for him. I didn't think he'd ever work in the media, but I think he does a pretty good job. And the older you get, the more mellow you get. But he had some interesting battles with the media, particularly in Perth, because he was a Victorian. And if you're a Victorian, you're an Eastern Stater, Damian. And even if they like you, you're still an Eastern Stater.
That's right. Adam Simpson found out. We're speaking with Dan Lonergan. Dan, the 2000 Olympics. I've got to ask you about Sydney 2000. So everyone who remembers it fondly. It was a great time of unity for the country, and really did show how good Australia was on the world stage in terms of hosting events, in terms of their sporting prowess. Talk to me about your memories of Sydney 2000, and even just getting the role of being a commentator for the games.
Well, I didn't think I'd be
You
going.
respect it?
No, I didn't. I mean, certainly early in the year, I thought myself and Charlie King and Quentin, who was in his second year, now one of the great broadcasters at the ABC. Love listening to him at the tennis this week. He's an excellent tennis commentator. And also Peter Newlands. I thought we'd all miss out. Probably maybe one Olympic cycle too early for us. And I thought, and that's okay. You'd love to go. Anyway, Peter Longman came over doing the work appraisals. And I thought, I need to find out. And Jody would like to know. I think it was June, and the Olympics were September. Of course, they'd be the footy season been brought forward a couple of weeks in the middle of September. And I said to Longo, could be pretty laid back, I said, any news on the Olympics about whether I'm going? No dramas if not. He said, oh, yeah, you're going. Yeah, it was almost like, of course you're going. You should know by now. I'm thinking, well, I didn't know, but I didn't say anything. And it was quite funny. And I rang Jody pretty rapt, and rang the old man who was struggling a bit with his cancer, and he was delighted. And he said he and Mum were going up to visit some friends, so we'd try and catch up, which would be good in Sydney. So I was looking forward to that. And then Glenn called me in and he said, Daniel, you're going to have to probably go over all the minor sports. So you're sort of au fait. You might be doing a lot of calling, but you might be required to go out and cover events that Australia might go well in. Because you have to remember, Damo, because it was a home Olympics, Australia were in every single sport. They didn't have to qualify. So they just automatically, if they had a team, they'd go in every single sport. And I ended up being involved in the handball. And the handball was fascinating. It was European handball. It wasn't the down ball we used to play at school. It was the European handball. And Australia hardly had a team. They had some players that played, but it wasn't a big sport. And what they were trying to do, the Handball Federation, organising it with Damien Keogh, had a role with Channel 7, the host broadcaster for the Olympic Games, and of course the former basketballer, was they thought they'd try and get together a reality TV show and try and encourage former players from other sports. Chris Langford was one they looked at, the 300 gamer at Hawthorn, and now he was a former AFL commissioner, former captain, four-time premiership player. Mark McGaw was another one, star rugby league player, as two guys who were still pretty fit, just retired from their sports, that they could look at as guys that they could maybe fast track into the handball team. Now, there were people that weren't happy about that were involved in the sport, that thought that they deserved the opportunity. Now, these guys, Langford and McGaw tried. Langford was busy being an architect and a young family, and he lived in Sydney, and he realised that he was fit enough. McGaw the same. McGaw was bowling people over, but they didn't really understand the rules. It was quite a technical sport. It was a bit like soccer. It was played indoors, a bit like soccer in reverse. The only one allowed to kick the ball was the goalkeeper. Like in soccer, the only one allowed to handle the ball in a certain area of the pitch is the goalkeeper as well. You had 5 on the pitch. So it required a lot more than just having brawn. which Mark McGaw had and Chris Langford to a lesser extent. So what they did was they realised that things weren't going well in Yugoslavia, the splitting of the Yugoslavian countries. And they got a lot of people from Yugoslavia to come out and live here, got them on visas for a little while, bridging visas. And they were players that had played over there. It was a big Eastern European sport. It was developing in Asia as well. So they came out and they were able to cobble a team together, men and women. And I learned that sport quite thoroughly because I thought if there's any sport that we might do a little bit of, because it's a sport we've never done anything of because Australia's never been in it. It might be handball, and I ended up becoming Australia's foremost handball commentator. Now, Damo, I might have actually given myself that nickname because no one else had done it. Australia's only handball commentator, and until we get to 2032 in Brisbane, I will have that title. And so I can hang on to it until I'm sure someone else from the ABC or from another commercial station or from whoever the host broadcaster is then will get the opportunity to call a handball because at least Australia will be represented. And we also had the first time the indoor volleyball as well, which is a sport I've always loved. So I learned all the minor sports. The only minor sport I didn't do much work on was weightlifting. I knew a little bit about it. We got 3 or 4 days in. And, of course, swimming was the big sport, and Australia were going pretty well. And it was just huge. You know, the IBC, we had a very big studio area. We had so many staff, whether it be news or sport, there working hard. And I heard this voice, this husky voice. It was Graham Smokey Dawson, who was going to be doing all the weightlifting and many of the other sports I've tuned. And I heard Marksy say, "Don't worry, Smoke, you'll get your voice back." That'll be right, Marksy, I'll keep going. No, you won't. You can't. We'll give you a couple of days off. You've got to get your voice right. Who's going to do it? We'll get someone else to do it. We'll be right. Anyway, I walked out. Now, I must have just been line of sight, either a good time or bad time. You can look at it either way, don't you? I've gone from one studio into the recording studio to record a volleyball summary. And Marksy said, "Oh, we'll see who knows anything about weightlifting, won't we, Dan Lonergan?" I said, "What are you talking about, Marksy?" He said, "Oh, Smokey's lost his voice. I'd like you to do the weightlifting." How much about weightlifting? And I threw an expletive in there and said, "Oh, Marksy, do you?" I said, "Oh, a little bit." He said, "Well, we're about to find out, aren't we?" I said, "Oh, how long have I got, Marksy?" 30 seconds. There was another couple of expletives. Sorry, Marksy. And I've gone in and Smokey's given me all these pieces of paper. You could have had a fire sale in there. So I've gone in and Glenn's coming to help. He heard and just to get me over the line. It was the women's clean and jerk and the snatch. It was a brand new event at the Olympic Games. And so I had to learn a little bit about that. But, I mean, it's not too hard to get to know. I mean, the snatch is straight up. Clean and jerk is probably the more exciting one, the one where there's more anticipation, where the weightlifter gets it and puts it on their shoulders and then lifts it the rest of the way. And then you're building up the anticipation and they get 3 cracks at it. So I was able to get through that. The names were okay. And at the end of it, they said, "Well done. Can you do it tomorrow?" So I thought, well, again, as I said to you, Damo, it's all about if you get through it, and they say you're rostered on tomorrow, even if they say not much other than well done, I presume you're doing a good job. And then there was some tennis, and I think that Leighton Hewitt was playing his doubles partner at the time, the big Belarusian, Max Murney, the beast, in a singles match. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing going on. And Marksy said, "Have you called much tennis?" I said, "Oh, a little bit." And he said, "Well, there's not much going on." And in the end, I just kept going and going and going and kept looking. And then Longo came in and said, "Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going." And I called a 1.5 sets. And then they kept crossing back. I did a little bit of volleyball. So I just sort of filled in. It was just a wonderful experience. And probably the highlight, though, was not being on air, was when Glenn and I were walking in the foyer and we ran into the incomparable Muhammad Ali, who was being wheeled through the IBC, and we went up to him and he was as rapt to see us as he would be anyone. I mean, he's such a friendly guy. Then, of course, his MS had absolutely, his Parkinson's by then was a real concern for him. But it was just great to go up and shake hands with the great man. And I mean, wherever he goes, he just attracts people. And that was just a great highlight. But it was a wonderful Olympic Games. It just had atmosphere wherever you went. There was plenty to do, great fun. Australia performed pretty well. And, I mean, as Juan Antonio Samaranch, the president of the IOC, said, it was an exceptional Olympic Games. I think we'll get to that in a minute, no doubt, as we chat for KISS Professional Solutions, John McEncrow and the gang. It's great to chat with you, Damo, about my career. Really appreciate it, even though I'm not sure how many will listen, but we'll just keep going here as I digress. But I mean, the 2012 Olympics was fantastic in that I think that London had gone to the next level in a big city, like Sydney had gone to the next level in a big city as well. But up until Sydney, I don't think the Olympics had ever been as good as that. And I think we can be very, very proud of what we achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I leave the Sydney Olympics, was there a great vibe that you sensed? I mean, outside of the sport, was there a great vibe permeating around the city or around Sydney?
Oh, there was. I mean, we went to a few of the parties and you'd have a great time. I remember when the Australian women's water polo team, first time the women's water polo was at the Olympic Games, and the girls won. It was an outstanding performance. They beat the USA. Yvette Higgins has scored with 1.5 seconds, if that, to go. Clinton Gribus's call was brilliant. He called it like most people listening to him didn't really know the sport. This is what's going to happen. I mean, just brilliant, outstanding. Couldn't beat it. Probably along with Tim's call of Kathy Freeman and Jerry's call of when they won the relay, beating Gary Hall and the USA team on the first night. Right up there, superb. For a young man like that at the age of 25, that's why I always thought he'll go places. But going to the Gladesville Hotel, and everyone went that could go, and you thought that the roof was going to blow off when the girls walked in. It was unbelievable. It was an atmosphere that you'll never forget. It was probably an even better atmosphere than when Max Walker bowled Tony Greig in the centenary test of 77, and Mitch Stark got Brendan McCullum out early in the 2015 World Cup, or Dennis Lilly dismissed Viv Richards near the end of the day, first day of that memorable Boxing Day test, 1981, Damo. It was absolutely sensational. And just the atmosphere, knowing that this is a brand new sport, that these girls or ladies, and the ones like Debbie Watson, I should say, etc., and others, have been involved in the sport for a long time. I got reasonably close to her. She had tears in her eyes about what the atmosphere was like and people coming up to them. I mean, that atmosphere and the party atmosphere of that night, and just in general, just indicated how happy everyone was. They were all excited. I mean, we just thought this is as good as it's ever going to get for Australia, having the Olympic Games, a big event like this. And I know there are some people out there that are not interested in sport, but how can you not be interested in sport when you have an event like this that brings the whole country together? And it doesn't matter whether you're a West Australian, you'll go to Sydney, or you're a South Australian, you'll go to Sydney, or you're a Melburnian who's not madly in love with Sydney, you'll still go because it's part of what Australia does. And it just brought the whole country together, and the atmosphere will never be beaten. I mean, as I say, I think London might have done the game slightly better because they had better resources in tact 12 years later. But was the atmosphere as good? London's probably, to me, even a bit more spread out than Sydney. So maybe the atmosphere wasn't quite as good. But still, being in Sydney in 2000 was very, very special.
Now we head to a period of time, Dan, where you make the move back to Melbourne. And I preface this by wanting to ask you about a man you just mentioned before, Clinton Gribus, who was at the ABC, I think, up until the end of 2000, and then AW came a knocking. Can I ask you about your memories? I don't know if you worked with him all that much, but I'm sure you crossed paths. A lot of people still bring his name up today. He passed away, Dan, over 17 years ago, and his name still gets brought up quite often today. Tragic passing, of course, in his early 30s. What are your memories of being, I guess, somewhat of a colleague of his and passing by as well? Do you remember the last time you spoke to him, for instance? What are your memories of Clinton?
Oh, I remember speaking to him at the cricket. I think he used to go on these long holidays. I think the last one he went to was South America at the end of the footy season and come back, and he'd be sitting in the 3AW booth, and I'd be at the cricket as well, and I'd go in and say good day, and he'd have all the newspapers. And he'd be just writing things out and putting them in his scrapbook about important aspects of sport that he needed to bone up on and keep abreast of after being away for a long time. And we'd have a little bit of a chat, and we'd chat at the footy. And look, he kept to himself, but I always got on well with him. I mean, I followed him, Damo. I mean, he was in Melbourne going to footy in '96, and then I came and replaced him when he went to Perth. And then when he came back to Melbourne, as I said earlier, I went to Perth. And then when he went to AW, when they came knocking, it was a very astute decision by Rex and Bondi and the crew there to appoint him. He was outstanding. And he and Rex were just a wonderful team. And then, of course, I got the job, head of Francis Leach, to come back and replace him in Melbourne in 2001. And he was a nice guy, Clinton. I mean, I'll always remember one thing about him that always sticks out is his generosity. Jodie and I were about to get married in late February 1999, and I'd come back from Perth, and she would come over with me after we got married. And we were just out and about doing a few things 2 days before we got married. And it was a Thursday, and the phone rang. Jodie answered it. And you could hear this voice in the background. Is that Jodie? It is. Clinton Gribus, Jodie. How are you? Blah, blah, blah. A bit of a chat. And I just want to wish you all the best for Saturday. And she said, oh, that's so nice. And I had a chat to him and he wished me all the best. And I thought that's a really nice thing for someone to do. And Jodie always thought that was really nice too, that he did that. And he was always friendly every time I saw him. And then he was head and shoulders above me as a broadcaster. He's just one of those special broadcasters. Just a great, great talent. I mean, he, of course, started doing that white line fever with the talk back on television in footy. I mean, that was an ingenious idea from him and David Loudon, was a good mate of mine. We were at radio school together before I started my career. And he's a very good talent too, David, especially behind the scenes, and a great fella. And he was just special. He just had something about him that made him head and shoulders above everyone else. It would be interesting now, Damian, of the dynamics that would exist with someone like a Clinton Gribus, a Gerard Whateley, even an Anthony Hudson. I think Clinton would be head and shoulders above all of them. I mean, I think he'd certainly still be at Fox. He would have been at Fox now 24, 25 years. I remember coming across something to do with Clinton. I'm writing a book as well at the moment, and I just wanted to get some background on him. And I remember coming across a promo of what was going on in 2002 on Fox Footy. I mean, he was just a bright-eyed 27-year-old at the time, and how comfortable and confident he was in front of the camera. That everything he did, he turned to gold. And look, the industry would have certainly changed by now, but I honestly believe that he'd probably be doing something on SEN like Gerard, probably ahead of Gerard. Gerard might still be at the ABC. Who knows? I mean, that's something we're never going to know. But I dare say that he would be number one in the town now. He'd be 50 years old this year in regard to being a broadcaster. And he would have called so many Olympic Games on the track. He might have called some swimming. I mean, anything he would have called, he might have even been doing. The NFL, which Gerard will do in a couple of weeks' time, the Super Bowl, which is coming up soon. I just think he would have been number one, would have called everything exquisitely. And there might be a question mark saying, is he the best? I still think he's right up there being the best we've ever seen. But I think that if he had have lived, there would have been no question mark in front of him. We've had some great ones, Dennis, Bruce, Tim, etc., as I mentioned. But I think that Clinton, without a shadow of doubt, would have been head and shoulders above everyone as the best sports broadcaster this country has ever produced.
Where were you when you found out he passed away, Dan?
I was home with the family in Heidelberg Heights in the northeastern suburbs, and I had the phone off. And my mother, who's pretty astute in things like this, she has three or four radios on in the house all the time. Used to drive us mad. We'd go around there. And she said sad about, she rang at home because she couldn't get me on the mobile. So she rang the home phone and she said, sad about Clinton. I said, what do you mean? Well, haven't you been listening? I said, no, I've had the phone off. I haven't been listening to anything. We've been home. He's died. I said, what? So I put the phone on and it lit up like a Christmas tree. And I thought, wow. And anyway, Ross Booth rang. And Ross Booth, who sadly passed away last year, now another one of nature's gentlemen in this industry, beautiful person, beautiful man, called the VFL with Clinton for many, many years. They were very close. He was in tears. Had a chat to him, had a chat to Bondi. I wasn't close to Bondi, but I had a chat to Bondi and asked me would I go on Robert Doyle, who was doing some work for them at the time after he left politics, having, of course, lost that election for the Liberal Party in 2006. So I went on and spoke to Robert Doyle about my memories of Clinton. I said, absolutely. I remember hearing Peter Booth say, something on both news and on the ABC programs. I was asked, I think Susie rang me and said, we're trying to find the water polo call. I said, well, I think you'll find it in there. I remember seeing it recently. I don't know why. Well, when I say recently, it was a couple of years ago during the 2006 Commonwealth Games. And they found that and played that. And I don't think people realised how good it was until they heard it again. So, look, it was pretty tough because we all thought, well, this guy's not 33 yet. And he's really at the start of a great career. He's already achieved a lot in the past 12 years, but he's not even a quarter of the way through his career. And we've lost him. And I think the industry took a deep breath. And I know it certainly affected Rex. And a shout out to Rex. I hope he's okay, because he loved him, absolutely loved him. I'll never forget one day they were calling Fremantle, and there was Scott Thornton of the Dockers, who had the blonde hair, and he had a pretty white body like my old man. My old man was the whitest man I knew, an Irishman. He used to put about 4 layers of sun cream on when he'd go to the beach. I reckon Scotty Thornton had to do that. And Rex called him the albino. Here's the albino. And then Clinton took over and said, that'll be Thornton. So when Rex had come up with a nickname, Clinton had cleaned it up and mentioned the real player. That's why they were an outstanding team, because you had Rex's colour and he could be who he wanted to be, who he needed to be. There was only ever one Rex Hunt, and Clinton was the straight caller. And that's why, I mean, Rex had some great teammates. He and Shane Healy were pretty good. He and Hutto were very good. I don't think he and Bill gelled very well, but I thought they were okay together. No. Jacobs in the 3 years they worked together. But he and Clinton were one of the great on-air commentary teams. And there have been a lot of very special ones over the years. I grew up listening to Smokey and Smooth, and obviously Harry Beitzel and Bill Jacobs and Major and Jack Dyer. But I think that Rex and Clinton, again, rating who are the best, might have been the best on-air football commentary team in the 7 years they spent together.
Listening to Dashy Dan's Sporting Adventures, discussing the career of Dan Lonergan himself with thanks to KISS Professional Solutions. Dan, the move over to Melbourne, you obviously, there were probably extenuating circumstances, but talk us through why you made the move and your early days calling in Melbourne in 2001.
I always wanted to try my luck in Melbourne. Because I was from there, I wanted to call regularly at the MCG, or I'd like to if the opportunity presented itself, call the big games. My father wasn't well. He was in the last year of his battle with cancer. He was given 3 years and he got 3 years. Jody's mother at the time wasn't all that well. So I just thought it was time. Look, if I didn't get the job, we had plans. We had a nice house, a small house in a beautiful part of Perth, Mount Hawthorn, again in the northwestern suburbs, a lovely part of the world. And we would have renovated that house. And then 2 or 3 years later, the mining explosion came in, and we would have got a lot of money for that house if we had have hung on, but we didn't. But anyway, I just thought I'd like to try Melbourne. Now, I was probably being a bit selfish because Jodie had just found herself a job back in Perth with the same company she had in Melbourne. Wasn't And she'd be one of the first to admit it wasn't a job that she liked a great deal, but she made some good friends from that workplace. They were wonderful people, Soul of the Earth people that we got on very well with. And she was reasonably settled in the house as well. But this opportunity came up and I thought I'd give it a go. And I didn't do as well in this interview as I did in one the previous year that Clinton got, which was Peter Booth's job. Now, I knew I wasn't going to get that job if Clinton was fair dinkum, because he was the man and he got that job, and so he should have. And then, and I actually did a good interview because I was pretty relaxed. This one, I probably wasn't as relaxed. I couldn't find a lot of decent AFL calling for the audio file, but I found some pretty decent waffle calling. Tim Lane made a point. He said, I think that sometimes your AFL calling, you sound a bit intense. You don't sound like you're letting it all hang out, but your waffle calling, you do. I did the interview and I thought at the end of it, oh, geez, I'm in trouble here. Jodie and I went and had lunch and I said, that renovation I think is going to happen. She said, really? I said, yeah, I think I'm gone. I think I'm gone. Did you do a poor interview? She said, not a poor interview. I just think that there are a lot of questions asked about why do I want to come back. I'm number 2 in Perth. I'll be number 3 in Melbourne. That I probably didn't answer as well as I would have liked. Anyway, I'd almost given up on it. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Peter, from Katrina Palmer, who's now a manager. She's done really well for herself of ABC Radio in Sydney, and she was filling in for Tracy Parrish, who was on maternity leave as the EP of Sport, a very good one too, and Tim Lane, and they talked more. They said they'd spoken to Wally. Wally felt that I'd be a right man for the job. So again, I thank Wally. And in the end, I got the job. So we only had a few weeks to sell the house. We sold the house. We came over. Jodie got herself a job with the same company again, a boss in Melbourne. Absolutely loved her. Just a quick story on that, Damo. He said there's a job internally in the insurance company that she worked for. Have a look for it. Anyway, she looked for it and she rang him back and said, look, I can't find that job. He said, it's been filled. Oh, that's unfortunate. He said, yes, you start in 2 weeks. So the job was always there for him because I rang him up and I said, that job was always there, Greg, wasn't it? He said, yes. We love her. We wanted her to come back, and we're glad she's coming back. But I just wanted her to sweat. I love her stewing and sweating. I said, oh, she's angry with you, but look, that's good. So I was comfortable that she had a job, that I then didn't feel so guilty. So we came back and we settled into Melbourne. Called at Docklands, interesting ground to call at. I mean, not a great ground, obviously, to watch footy at. And I know Drew in particular used to go mad about the fact the ground was built the wrong way, but it wasn't a bad ground to call from. You're fairly high up. You've called there before, and you overlook the whole ground. And when the roof's closed, there's a wonderful atmosphere. Called St Kilda and the Dogs on Friday night, and Malcolm Blight, a very expensive coach, of course, got a victory for the Saints. I think they all thought, here we go, here we come. It was a bit of a false dawn, and he got sacked 15 rounds into the season. And then I called a game on Sunday, called 3 games that weekend. I called West Coast and Geelong. And I'll always remember Geelong had picked up Justin Murphy. He left Carlton, and I've never seen a bloke play for himself with the greatest respect than Justin Murphy was that day. I know it wasn't a good year for him. And I know he was angry at Darren Milburn later in the year for knocking out Steve Barney. We'll never forget that out at Princes Park. But he was just virtually get the ball and he'd kick to a teammate a metre in front of him. I just thought to myself, and I didn't say it on air, but I thought to myself, this is an example of a bloke who doesn't really want to be there. But Geelong had a good win, and I thought, gee, this might be West Coast's worst year. It might be a bad year to have come back across the border, because Freo took forever to win their first game of the year, and West Coast struggled. They were two of the bottom teams. And so I called a lot of games at Docklands. I called Hawthorn and Essendon the night after we bought our house earlier that day, and that was a bit of a stressful experience. And then I called Hawthorn and Essendon that night. The Hawks were undefeated, and Essendon absolutely blew them away. They were still the best side in it. Huge atmosphere, biggest crowd there ever has been. And I thought, that's why I'm back to call the big games. And that was fantastic to call. And then later in the year, I called, I think, a Fremantle match. They were playing Essendon, and I think Dwayne was doing something else. And I called Saturday afternoon with Tim, and that was a real highlight to be part of the commentary team, working with Caroline Wilson in the pre-match for the first time. I asked a couple of hard questions of Ben Allen, and Tim was rapt that I asked them. Couldn't believe it. And I sort of just kept at him for a little bit. And I then said later on, look, I apologise. And Tim and Caroline said, no, you have to ask the hard questions. And I was actually quite happy with myself. And Freo kicked the first 3 goals, and Tim and I thought, wow. And then they hardly scored after that. So, look, there were some memorable moments. I really enjoyed that first year. It was good fitting in. And I knew my role too. I was number 3 behind Tim and Dwayne, who were a great team. They got on really well in the first year. I think the second year was a difficult year. And the reason why the second year, Damo, was a difficult year was the situation with Channel 9, where both of them, and I was on paternity leave because we just had our first child, Laura, but both of them were given an opportunity to go to Channel 9. As you know, at the end of 2001, the Channel 7 rights ran out, and Channel 9 and Channel 10 were going to share them. And Channel 9 were looking for commentators, and they had asked him and Dwayne to come across. Dwayne's attitude always was that Channel 9 are my main employers, and the ABC, and they allow me to work for the ABC, or was it vice versa? But anyway, I thought the ABC was his main employer, but he said Channel 9 was. So he worked for the ABC, calling the footy Friday night, Saturday, and for Channel 9 on Sunday. Tim's arrangement was to call on Friday night for Channel 9, but he also had put in his contract that Eddie McGuire wasn't to call with him. Of course, was running the coverage as well as the footy show. I think he's still doing the footy show.
Not calling Collingwood games, yeah.
But Tim didn't want him to do the Collingwood games because he felt that it would be uncomfortable and unprofessional for him on a Saturday to call Collingwood games with Eddie on a Friday night. And then if he had Eddie on, talking to Eddie on a Saturday about Collingwood issues and football issues in general. And he had that as part of his journalism integrity put into his contract. Now, Channel 9 said no, they wouldn't allow that to happen. So in the end, Tim had to resign. And of course, this is where Dennis got his opportunity. And from then on, Dennis became the Friday night specialist at Channel 9. He was the star. And then, of course, he became an even bigger star when he went back to Channel 7, and he and Bruce, talking of on-air teams, maybe Rex and Clinton were the best on-air radio team, but I think Dennis and Bruce are the best on-air television team. They were part of a wonderful team, certainly on Friday night, and a lot of Sundays, Damo, together for 10 years. So it was Dennis's benefit, Tim's misfortune, and then 12 months later, the proverbial hit the fan again at the ABC because of the fact that he resigned, because I think he was sick and tired of maybe not getting the market value that he deserved, and that's fair enough, from the ABC.
Yep.
And then Dwayne didn't sign a contract, and yours truly was left holding the baby, basically being the only full-time staff member left on the eve of the 2003 season.
And of course, Dan, that was to your benefit because you became part of the main team, didn't you, in Melbourne, which for the national broadcaster must have been a dream come true. Was it an awkward situation to be in given those circumstances? And also, I know Virginia Trioli probably wasn't complimentary of you when she possibly should have been, given you're a colleague, when the announcement was made. Can you talk to us about the expectations you put on yourself coming into that virtually what was a number one role?
Oh, massive expectations. I'll never forget it because I was at the cricket, doing the state cricket, and Susie was in New Zealand, and she rang me. She said, "Have you heard from Dwayne yet?" I said, "No, haven't been trying to get him, haven't heard from him." Anyway, Graham Bond was in the box next door, and he was reasonably sheepish. And then he said to me, "Have you heard the news?" A couple of hours later, I said, No. What's going on? And he said, Dwayne has resigned and joined us. I said, Really? And he was basically going to be doing a couple of sport shows and maybe calling if there was a role for him. But he was more intent on Channel 9. And I tried to get him, couldn't get him. And I waited and I thought, well, it's not my job to tell Peter Longman. But I didn't get the impression that Longo knew. And it was before the days where everything was on social media. If it was social media days, it would have been up. And the phone rang a little bit of rumours. And I said, well, I can't say anything. And I said, that means it's true. I said, I can't say anything. I'm hearing rumours, but I'm not 100% sure. And then, of course, a few of the journos down the other end of the room in the Ron Casey Centre, Damo, came up and said, what's going on? I said, well, I don't know, to be honest. Anyway, at about 4:30, I've rung Peter. I said, look, Long, I don't know whether you've heard, and I've been trying to get him, but Dwayne has signed with AW. And he said, is that true? I'd heard a rumour. And I said, you better go on the website. So he got on the website, and it was true. And he went on Virginia's show, and he said, look, we've got Dan Lonergan, and he'll lead as well. And she said, really? What about his lack of experience? And I was furious. I was listening down the line, waiting to do other crosses for the cricket. And I asked for a right of reply, which I didn't get. And I've always felt Virginia's a bit of a diva when she took over from John Fane quite a few years later. This is just my opinion, don't know, but other people may like her. But I always just found her a bit of a diva when she took over from John Fane, and he had his last ever show, and he was having it at the Regent Theatre, and he had all the premiers on and lots of great guests. She came on, and all she did was not talk about him at all and give him any praise at all about her starting on Monday. And then when the premier at the time, Dan Andrews, came on the show on Monday, he said, what a great day it was Friday. She said, yeah, but we're in a new era now. And I thought, not kosher, but look, you can't get on with everyone. There's a lot I don't get on with, Damo, but yeah, I was pretty disappointed. I was determined to prove her wrong, determined to prove a lot of people wrong, but my, I suppose, news-breaking skills weren't outstanding. I certainly tried to improve them. I tried to come up with new ways of attracting talent and new ways of gathering information and getting my contact base up to scratch. Gerard was very good at that. He'd already started doing some work for us in 2002, doing a news update on Sunday in our pre-match. And look, they were interested in him. It was an expression of interest for him. He was, of course, the main newsbreaker at Channel 10 in the footy. And Drew
Yep.
was interested in the job, and I helped him out apply for the job. Mate, I've never applied for a job before. You can imagine, Damo, I won't go into it, how that conversation went. There were a couple of those conversations. It was very colourful. It was outstanding. I loved every single minute of it. And I helped him, and it went really, really well. He got the job, and he was already calling with me anyway on Saturday. And then then Jared got the job as well. And I always thought, and he started calling with me Sunday afternoon. And by halfway in the season, he'd taken over the pre-match, which I suppose is fair enough. And he was very good at that, very, very good at that. And I came up with a number of retro pieces to do for the Sunday show, and my knowledge of the game, my historical knowledge of the game was certainly helping. But I probably didn't have the new sense that he had, and I couldn't get. The other thing too was I couldn't attract the big journos. Caroline left because she said she was offered big money. Couldn't get Mike Sheehan. Patrick Smith wouldn't come across. So with the greatest respect, Mark Stevens was still finding his way. He's very good. And he and Michael Davis came across. Michael Davis didn't have as high a profile. So that made it, again, tougher. And we'd also had our pre-match cut by an hour from 2 to 1 because they put the could have beens on between 11 and 1. So some might say we are hiding to nothing. Were you set up to fail? I don't think I was set up to fail. But I think they were hoping that Jared would accept the job, which he did, and that I was never a long-term candidate to be the number one commentator. But when they took it away from me in 2005, it hurt because I thought I called pretty well. I mean, I called a couple of grand finals. 2003 was special. 2004 when Port stormed over the top of Brisbane, even though I reckon Mark Williams behaved like a pork chop at watching Wanganeen and Pickett and all those brilliant Indigenous stars played really, really well against the tired Brisbane side. And in 2003, Brisbane having one shot in the locker and Simon Black putting on a clinic and having 39 possessions and calling that. That was a great highlight, and just being out there, being part of grand final. They try to make it like a normal game, but it's not, because you know what's on offer at the end of it. Obviously a Premiership Cup and the players getting medals and everything like that. But I enjoyed it. It was a tremendous opportunity for me, but unfortunately they were keen on Jared, and at the end of the day, it's probably proven to be the right decision.
I might talk to you about the '03 grand final, Dan, because it's your first one, and I know probably in the moment you don't think about it as much, but you reflect on it now and think, wow, what an experience. Did you feel that you made it at that point, calling a grand final for the national broadcaster?
Yes, I did. But you want more. I mean, we're greedy people, Damo. You do one, you want to do two. You do two, you'd like to do three. It's like anyone making their debut in Test cricket. They play one, they want to play 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And same with playing AFL footy and one Olympic Games. It's a 4-year cycle. You'd love to go again, having experienced it. So having done one, you want to perform well. And I thought I performed reasonably well. I listened back to it, and you're always your own worst critic, and I certainly am. And there were areas I thought I could have been a little bit better in. I thought my player ID generally was pretty good. I thought I kept up with the play okay. Occasionally I was a bit verbose, areas to work on. Maybe I got a bit excited at times. I did, though. I remember nailing the piece of play by Reshaw where he dashed around the outer side. Now the Shane Warne stand, the great Southern stand side, and he lost control of the ball, and he was pickpocketed brilliantly by Alistair Lynch. I called that, and that was a wonderful moment. And when Simon Black is hitting players lace out, calling that as well, brilliant football, and then having the commentators the experts coming over the top of you, that was superb, and just working well with Drew. So it was a really special day. It was great waking up knowing you were going to do it, instead of knowing you were just going to watch it. You're actually there broadcasting. You had to prepare for the grand final like you would normally any other game. But as I say, there was obviously something more riding on it at the end, the Premiership Cup, the chance to be premiers, Brisbane looking for 3 in a row. So it was a special day, a historical day. First team looking to do that in some 46 years after Melbourne had been successful, 55, 56, 57. And to be part of that and to call that was very, very special.
You called footy at the ABC for around 14 years, Dan. Can you tell us about some of the memorable moments? It doesn't have to be memorable games, but just memorable moments calling where something quirky might have happened, or an interview that stands out, or even some of the expert commentators you worked with and some of their funny stories and work.
Well, I'll never forget one day. I can't remember who it was. A Richmond player got the ball out of the middle at the start of a game or at the start of a quarter, and he kicked it the wrong way. And I was calling.
Is it Kane Johnson?
Yes, it might have been Kane Johnson. I knew you'd know that. It was Kane Johnson, and Drew was calling it. And I reckon I was nearly saying, Drew, I'll see you in 5 minutes, which meant I was going downstairs onto the ground to pick his eyeballs up because his eyes nearly popped out of their head because he was trying to work, hang on, they're going the other way. Then he realised with his eyes popping out of his head that actually kicked in the wrong direction. I'll never forget that. That has always stood out as a moment that was very, very special. I always remember Dwayne Russell listening to him one day calling a game between the Bulldogs and Adelaide, and it was a final. He was very, very clever, Dwayne, with his lines. I wonder whether he might have rehearsed them at times, a bit like Dennis did at times, but they were still brilliant lines. And the Bulldogs were getting punished in this 98 prelim. It was all over again. They were a lot worse that year than they were the previous year. Game they should have won even though they didn't play well in 97, but 98 they were terrible. Adelaide was sensational. And McLeod had given Liver a bath, and Chris Burton, the runner, was called out by Plough. And Dwayne said, Terry Wallace has called out the Bulldog runner and said, in the words of Mick Jagger, hey, you, get off of McLeod. I was driving somewhere in Perth and I had to pull the car over, and I just thought it was one of the great lines. Every time you work with Mark McClure was hilarious. I mean, he'd be about things, and he'd be angry with the world. He'd be annoyed with the world. He'd be thinking, what are they doing? Kicking backwards, kicking sideways. Just get the ball and get on with it. And he'd shake his head and he'd go red in the face. He was hilarious. And another great moment was David Parker. And I always got on very well with Parker. I had a very good relationship with him. We were calling the day that Buddy Franklin kicked 13 back in 2012 at Launceston. And I was calling with a young guy called Damian McIver. He's a very good caller from Tassie. He spent some time in Melbourne. Excellent caller, Damian. Former player, very good player too at the state level down there. And Peter Newlands was down on the boundary and Parker was our expert. And to say that he didn't want to be there this day is the understatement of the century. Hawthorn had flown him over for luncheon. He just wanted to have a luncheon with all the ex-Hawthorn people, and that's fair enough. And I don't think we could get an expert to go over, or we were trying to save money or something, and he had a crack at the ABC, always trying to save money, and you always call him Parker. I've been asked to call the game, and I'd rather be at the luncheon. And I said, well, if you don't want to be, you have to be here. He said, Dan, what time do you want me? And I said, oh, well, the game's at 2 o'clock. We're only at 1:30, maybe 20 past 1, quarter past 1, David. Is that okay? Yeah. And he stormed off. And Damian McIver and Peter Newland said, oh, dear, he mightn't say anything. I said, he'll say something. He'll be right. And Peter said, what if he doesn't? Have you got a plan B? I said, nope. What are we going to do? I said, well, the three of us will just have to talk. We'll find things to do. Just do a bit of homework from last night. But I know him well. He'll drive us mad. The jugular vein will be sticking out. I'll cop a bit probably. Let me worry about all that. I know him well enough. We get on well enough. Just watch him when we get into the game and we get into the broadcast. So he turns up. He's angry. He's angry with the world. Gone to the toilet. Damien Peter said his mood's not much better. Peter said, I'll go down and just see what's going on. Yeah, see if you can get an expert. See if you can get an interview. I think he tried to organise one anyway. Didn't matter if he didn't. So he's gone down, and we welcome Damian McIver. We welcome David Parkin. Parko, welcome. Now, you called last night the big game between St Kilda and Richmond. The Tigers are starting to come. It was a magnificent game of footy. Richmond won. Did you enjoy it? And he just started moving in his chair, Damien, and the jugular vein started to fire up, and the mouth started to get to froth a bit in excitement. And off he went for the next 15 minutes. He did not break stride. And I got this text from Peter Newlands, and he just said, outstanding, Dan, outstanding. And he said, you knew that would happen all the time. And I was all along, didn't you? And I said, yep. But that was just David. David was like that. And during the game, he just loved calling Buddy. And he just said that was one of the best days of the footy I've ever enjoyed in my life. And I apologise for the way I behaved at the start. I behaved like a pork chop. But I said, it's all forgotten, Parker. just never forget it. It's just the way he was. He was a lovely man. I used to get trips with him to the airport all the time. We caught a lot of football together, David. And I was very good with my kids. They were young. They'd come up to him and say, hello, Mr. Parker. Lovely to see you. He loved them. And he'd chat to them. He's just one of the best blokes. I mean, I've been very lucky to work with him, to work with Sellers, to work with Stan Elves, to work with Lindsay Gilby, who's a good bloke, Adam Ramanauskas, Nathan Burke. There's been a plethora of stars. Tommy Hafey, David Mackay is one of the best guys I've ever met in footy. He's a sensational bloke. And, to work with those guys, I mean, John Doherty's over in Perth, Big Earl Spalding, very laid back. Steve Malaxos, Gary Bacanara, who's a sensational guy as well as a great footballer. You always hope your heroes that you watch as a kid. And I used to get annoyed with the Carlton guys because they always won. Swan was always too good and McClure was always too good. Excuse me. And you always hope that they are good people. And they were good people. And that was always a great highlight to turn up to the footy. Even Josh Fraser. I mean, Josh Fraser was a sensational bloke. You'd worked with him and absolutely loved it. Aussie Jones too was another good one. Peter Schwab, and you just turn up with these guys and Chris Grant, you'd love it. And I wanted him to be a good bloke because he was one of my heroes, and he was too. And it was just great working with all these guys, knowing that, I'm going to the footy. I'm doing what I love. I'm going to the footy, and I'm working with some of my heroes. It was sensational.
Yeah, absolutely. What about Drew Morfitt, the late Drew Morfitt, Dan? And I know he passed away suddenly about probably 7 or 8 years ago now, but you had a great association with him. He was pretty loose at times. I think you were somewhat kindred spirits, I reckon. I used to listen to you as a kid, and you seemed to have pretty decent chemistry. You got along well. Uh, Tell us about some of your memories of working with Drew.
Oh, I think we drove each other mad. I used to have a bit of a spitting problem when I called. That's why they had to produce my own special set of headphones. I think during COVID, I might have been on the air much. He said, mate, or words to that effect, why don't you eat grapes? I didn't really like grapes much. I reckon it dried my mouth up. He said, well, it needs to dry your mouth up, mate. You're spitting too much. So we used to have that argument. But, look, he was fabulous, Drew. He was just very, very funny. He called it a lot like television, even towards the end. But he was very good at padding. He was the master padder. If he was a bit unsure what was going on, he'd just say, they're going really hard there and they're working hard to get the footy. But generally, he knew what was going on, and his pausation was superb. And because he had that boyish sound, Damian, he was always fun. You always knew it was going to be a good day at the footy when Drew was there. And because he didn't follow the team either, he wasn't as invested as idiot he and me when the Dogs were playing, because he knew, here we go again. He's driving me mad because the Dogs are not going that well. But he would just call the game and he'd have a clear mind the whole time. And he had that high voice, but he also knew how to use the voice, being a high voice, that he wouldn't want to get too high because of the fact that it was a high voice. I mean, we'll never forget when he had to go back to the studio. It was one of the I think might have been nearly the last days, might have been back in 1991, Damo, when Brett Ellison took that mark. You weren't even born, but you'll know the date. He took that screamer mark of the year.
21, yeah.
And Drew had to go back to the studio and obviously record that. And, I mean,
yes,
he called it very high, but because he used his voice better than most, and he'd always talk about where you call from the diaphragm. He says, sometimes I didn't quite get that right. But he would call, because of having a high voice, he'd call at the right level, and he'd always get it right. You know, if something special was happening, what a goal! And look, it was just a
magnificent,
exactly. You just knew what a great day it was going to be when you worked with someone like Drew. He was obviously, you're right, loose at the start of the day. He'd get the swearing out of the way early in the day. He'd go out and chat with Tim Lane, and they'd be a bit loose to each other, but I knew them well, and then I'd get involved in that conversation. And you think, I grew up with these blokes. I mean, they're not anything special. They're just normal blokes like me. But I grew up with these blokes, and I'm part of this group, being hung on and having a good time and not taking it too far and just enjoying it. But he taught you a lot about broadcasting, and he was a very good broadcaster and an excellent cricket commentator. We know he called the cycling really well, and we remember in 2012 when He shed a tear after Anna Meares had that win over Victoria Pendleton, which was one of the great races, one of Australia's very few good days at those London Olympics. Only won 7 gold, and they won 2 that day, of course, Anna Meares, and then Sally Pearson a bit later in the hurdles with the great David Thirsty Morrow, another one who's gone to God. But yeah, look, I loved it. I enjoyed it every time I worked with him. Early days, I thought, what have we got here? But we gradually, because it was just hilarious, but we just worked out our strengths and our weaknesses, and made sure we got through and had a great time. And we became firm friends at the end. We worked together for a long time. I mean, 13, 14 years of calling footy together. I'd like to think we were a good team. Maybe not the best team on radio, but I think we were a pretty good team. We knew each other pretty well. But then that's for other people to judge, Damien.
That's it. You're listening to Dashy Dan's Sporting Adventures, all thanks to Kiss Professional Solutions. Another man you worked with, you mentioned before, for quite a long time was Gerard Whateley. I know you had your ups and downs in your relationship, but Gerard's been a guest on your podcast recently, and I get the sense there's that mutual respect there, at least from the outside. Can you tell us, if you can, just a bit about your time working with Gerard? Because I know that there would have been ups and downs for sure, but you were there for a long time, and you get close to people for a period of, over that such a long period of time in which you work together. It's just natural when you're in a working relationship.
You don't really with Gerard though. I mean, that's just Gerard as a person, and that's not a criticism. Gerard was big on this. I'm not here to make friends at work. If it happens, it happens. And I don't think any of us were, but I don't think any of us made that comment. Look, he just did his job. The mistake I made was that I was against him when he first came because he'd taken over as the number one commentator. I should have just realised, okay, look, you've had 2 grand finals. There should be more down the track, but just take it as an opportunity to broadcast other matches, learn other skills. Don't take it as the rejection that I took it. Don't be jealous of Gerard. Gerard just might be a better talent, and I think there's a lot of areas where Gerard is a much better talent than me, certainly as a host in regard to coming up with opinions and then being able to put arguments against those opinions. I don't know of a better person in the industry that can do that. I mean, he just owns an opinion and then he's able to make you own that opinion. I don't know how you do that. I mean, that is just a very, very special talent. And look, he can call a lot of sports, probably call all sports a little bit better than me. I think there are some sports I'd like to think anyway that I'm a better caller than him, but it doesn't really matter. It's just your own perspective. But I think that he and we certainly for a long time didn't get on. I think he got annoyed with my behaviour. It certainly annoyed with my mental health. He didn't quite understand the mental health, but he wasn't there to understand the mental health. And I obviously used to probably get stuck into him behind closed doors a bit, which was silly of me, which was petty of me. But you're right. He's been on my podcast twice. He wasn't going to come on it as a preview for the Olympic podcasts, which were fantastic. But he came on in the last week, and that was great. And then what was even better was I thought, well, he's going to be busy. I put a call in 2 days after he'd arrived back. Any chance? He said, well, let's do it in the next day because I've got footy and we'll forget about it. And everyone will forget about it, which is probably unfair in the Olympics, but we all do, don't we? When we love them, but they're once every 4 years, and then the footy's every year, and it was getting into the business end of the season. So if we were going to do a review, we needed to do a review, and that was even better. That was sensational. Look, and I occasionally text him from time to time and just check in and see how he is. And I'd like to think he may have a different view, but I'd like to think that we get on okay now. And I will apologise for the way that I behaved at times around him, but it was an environment which was very tense, and I was a cause of that. I think Gerard at times was a cause of that. It was great that we had Drew there because he was more laid back and he certainly helped. But I think at the end, when Drew and my time came to an end in 2015 or 2014 and early 2015, I think that we were all a bit tired of each other. But Gerard was the one they all wanted. So, of course, he was the one that was going to remain. But look, a lot of water's passed under the bridge then, and I admire him for what he's achieved. He's done very, very well, and good luck to him. And I wish him all the best in the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks' time. It's a very hard sport to call, but he's mastered that brilliantly.
Now, I want to speak to you about the Olympics, Dan. We've spoken about football. We'll go to the Olympics and then we'll go to tennis after that
Yep.
because I remember, again, growing up listening to you call various events. Athens and London were the two Olympics you went to. You also called the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne in 2006. Just in chronological order, talk to us about. I mean, it must have been a great thrill to go to Athens in the sense that you were travelling overseas to call sport. I think that was the first time that had been the case for you in your career. Probably doesn't happen as much these days, does it? Because a lot of things are done off tube. But can you remember how good of an experience that was? Did you take the time out to enjoy it as much as you should have?
No, I didn't. No, I regret that. I was a bit nervous. Probably missed home a bit too much. Don't know why, but I did. Found out Jodie was pregnant, but I just needed to concentrate on the job at hand. Probably didn't perform as well as I would have liked. I called some good things, called some baseball. Australia made the gold medal playoff. Called that okay. Very difficult sport to call. Glenn certainly helped me out with that. He was terrific. I helped Simone Thurtell. I was asked one day. Karen was busy doing other things. So on my way in early into the Olympic Stadium or the Olympic Centre to have a look at all the other stadiums at Athens. And she asked me what I call the softball final with Simone Thurtell, who I got on quite well with. And that was a good experience. I really enjoyed calling that. I mean, it's a bit similar to the baseball, but that was a good sport to call. I hadn't called that before. I called some basketball for the Lithuanians, and it was a huge match, a big match, a high scoring match, and I probably didn't do it justice. And I called some Dream Team basketball with Walshy, which was a great experience because he's an excellent basketball commentator. But look, I think in general, my health wasn't great. I think it was one of the first signs where the mental health was a bit of an issue. I was a bit nervous. I enjoyed rooming with Walshy. We had a lot of fun with that. Enjoyed going out with a few of the guys. I remember I went out with the hockey team after the men won their first and only ever gold medal. They finally got the albatross off from around the neck, Damo, and I was with Wally and Claire Mitchell-Taverner, who called the hockey, and Tim Gavel, a good mate of mine, Damian, had come across from London. He was living there at the time to see me, which was terrific. We had a great day with the guys, and I wore Matthew Wells's gold medal, so that was a terrific highlight. But I probably... I don't know. I won't say I was immature. Was I trying too hard? I don't know why I didn't quite perform at the level that I wanted to perform. I had my moments, but I felt at the end of those Olympics that I hadn't. And I mean, it didn't help that I got lost first day running. I think Peter Longman might have thought, why did he do that? How did he do that? I mean, I was running with Wally Foreman and a couple of others, and we were just in the park across the road. I decided I wanted to run a bit more. Running, it sort of got me by the short and curlies at that stage. It became a bit of an obsession. We'd been sitting in a plane for a long time. And I mean, I wasn't a big man, so why was I worried about only running half an hour instead of an hour? And I thought I'll just run up the cobblestones. But every cobblestone you'd run up would be the same. And the more cobblestones you'd run up thinking you were just going around the block, you were running further away. And eventually I had a lady and her son who spoke a little bit of English, particularly a lady, got me back to where I needed to go. But that didn't help either. So that was a tough experience. Melbourne was good. I mean, again, it was just the same for us. We'd turn up, go home. It was a late start. It was certainly a late finish. I did the boxing, and I worked with one of the great characters, George Gritiusich and Benny Pike. They were working for the opposition then, or working for the commercial stations after long careers at the ABC. And I'll never forget, there was a semi-final in one of the lightweight divisions, and Lenny Zappafinger of Australia was competing. We had Brad Pitt, who was the house painter from Mount Martha, who went on to win a gold medal, and Jared Fletcher went on to win a gold medal, and Lenny had a chance of being in the gold medal playoff as well. If he didn't win, you automatically won a bronze medal. There was 2 bronze medals awarded to the semi-final losers. And anyway, I was told Longo hadn't had me on a lot, but Marksy was in charge. He'd been away doing some other things, but he was back producing on this day. He said, record, we'll get you in a second, record. And what I loved about Marksy, it took me a little while to work it out as a producer, an outstanding Olympic producer, Damian, and Commonwealth Games producer, was he's in your headphones the whole time. You've got to get used to it, but you've got to concentrate on the gig at hand. But he's telling you, reset, tell us what's going on, particularly if you're going from recording to live. And we're going live, and he said, we're going live now in the second round. Tell us what's going on, what the score is. The Australian's in a bit of trouble, and what punches he's thrown, and welcome to the exhibition centre, blah, blah, blah. And he good, good, good. And he's talking the whole time. He's like he's commentating to you and you're commentating the boxing. But while that was going on, George is right next to me, and George has got a voice like Foghorn Leghorn, the cartoon character, the chicken cartoon character. I said, boy, I said, man, I said, boy. And he was annoyed because they weren't coming to him. He said, we've got Lenny Zappafinger here. Lenny Zappafinger studio, Lenny Zappafinger. Get rid of those egomaniac Victorians, referring to Tim and Clinton, who are at the basketball and the athletics. He's saying this down the line. And Benny's saying, shut up, George. And I can hear it as I'm calling it boxing. And I've got Marksy in my headphones. Who said I can't do two things at once? A lot of people have said that over the years, don't they? So I'm hearing this. And anyway, we're in the second round now. And this fight is slipping away and you still haven't come to it. You should be coming to it. They're not doing anything. They're talking rubbish, those egomaniac Victorians. And then eventually they got halfway through the third round and they crossed to him. He didn't even talk about the boxing. He just went off on his high horse and started saying, this is a disgrace that they didn't come to the boxing. We've missed this. And he's going to get beaten comfortably. He throws a left. He throws a right. He throws another left. He throws a right. He gets him in the face. Oh, there's a left hook and a right hook from the Northern Irish fighter, but it's all over. And you didn't come to me until 2.5 minutes into the third round. And by this stage, I've got Marksy saying to me, good call, good job, go down and get an interview. Well done and get ready for the next one. And then I'm trying not to laugh, and Benny's just shaking his head, and he said to me, see, Dan, what I've got to work with. And then George I came back 10 minutes later, Damo, and he was still talking to someone about it, still going on about it. But it was an interesting experience, that. So I called a lot of the boxing and then called the 2 gold medal matches on the Saturday, and then interviewed Brad Pitt. And I told a few people, well, I've interviewed Brad Pitt. Is Jennifer with him? I said, oh, no, it's a different Brad Pitt. If it was Jennifer, I would have been there. I think we all would have been there, with the greatest respect. Jennifer Aniston, of course, from Friends. And then I missed out in 2008. I didn't think I would go.
You were annoyed?
Yeah, I would have loved to have gone to Beijing. That was a real disappointment for me, Damo. I felt I was good enough. But Jared was ready by then. Quentin was ready by then. And Drew was back. And, of course, he'd done a lot of Olympic Games and called really well. He'll forget his call of the 1984 pursuit in cycling, when he said that the Americans have got this new fandangled equipment and the Australians, well, their bikes, you wouldn't even use those to deliver the mail in. One of the great calls of all time. So they were always going to go, and I missed out, and I was disappointed. And I also, probably an even more bigger disappointment for me, was not going to India in 2010, because Jared pulled out due to the unrest, with the political unrest in India, and Charlie King pulled out due to the political unrest in India. And I thought, well, I've got to be a chance here. And then they took Peter Newlands, and he probably deserved it. He'd been to the 2006 Games and had done the shooting, so he was going to cover the shooting. And I still missed out. It was one of Peter Longman's last decisions. He then left, and Craig Nirenberg's came in. And Craig was very good to me at the start. And when he first rang me, while I was still away in India, he said, why aren't you in India? I said, I just wasn't chosen. He said, well, on my watch, you should be. Whether that was his way of saying, just cool down and you can relax and you'll get opportunities. And it certainly happened in my early days. And anyway, the day we were going overseas as a family, going to Ireland to visit family, in America to visit family. I've got lots of relatives on my dad's side. Damian live in New York and also live in Ireland and Florida. I found out I was going to the London Olympics the next year. So that was pretty exciting. So I've got to London, and it's the greatest moment in my career. Despite all the football I've called, the cricket, the tennis, which we'll get to in a minute, calling the London Olympics, and I touched on it earlier, I think in the way it was run and the resources that they had at their exposure, just slightly better than Sydney. Whether it had the same atmosphere, not sure, but it was certainly great around the Thames where we were staying and out at the Olympic Stadium. And I called a lot of different sports. One of my favourite moments was the basketball. The women's basketball team had been unbeaten in pool matches in the previous 3 Olympic Games that they'd played in. The only matches they lost were to the Americans, and they'd won silver medals. So they were in very, very good form, Australia. And they, unfortunately, though, in the first match against France, didn't play anywhere near as well as they could have. They were struggling a bit. And they were basically trailing with less than a second to go. It looked like they're going to lose their first pool match in 3 Olympic Games. And what happened was Belinda Snell got the ball, and I was calling it, and she was behind halfway. And Belinda Snell's got the ball. Last chance for Australia. This will be impossible. She shoots right on the buzzer. It's gone in. It's a Hail Mary. Belinda Snell has taken it to overtime. And people were watching me in the other booths that I was working with, and they thought I was going to actually blow up and expire. One of the producers was Marty Roth from Perth, lovely fella, Marty, tech producers. He was laughing because he said he knew what I was like. And Julian Abbott was one of the senior producers, and he said, "Mate, that was great. I want you to be my wingman," which meant he wanted me to call a lot of the other sports and do a lot of the sports that just came up when Australia were going well, which included slalom, canoeing, and 18-year-old Jess Fox, who I think put the sport on the map. And she did really, really well in winning a silver medal. And she was the second competitor. What I love about that sport, Damo, is when you qualify for the final, if you are the slowest qualifier, you go first. If you're the second slowest qualifier, you go second. And we saw, of course, with Jess winning that K1 for the first time this year. I think she was the fifth or sixth qualifier. So she was sitting for a long time. She had a pretty poor semi. She was sitting, I suppose, in the gold medal seat for a long, long time. And no one beat her. On this occasion, she was sitting there for even longer. And she was an 18-year-old in her first Olympic Games. And she won silver. So that was pretty special calling that. And I called 3 sailing gold medals. I called Tom Slingsby winning gold. And on the last day of that event, all he had to do was be ahead of the Cypriot sailor, Contarsis. And what he needed to do was get involved in a match race, which meant he just needed to know where Contarsis was in the field, which was he could be second last and Contarsis could be last, knowing that if he still picked up 9 points for this race, none of the other competitors in front could pass them. So that was an interesting sport because it's a very technical sport. I didn't really know much about the technical side of the sport, except obviously the match racing side. I'd gone out as part of my preparation to the Sandringham Yacht Club in Melbourne, and I got seasick a couple of times going out. So I thought, well, I won't do that again, but I'll just read up and watch. And I love doing all that because it was a number of different sports, and it was just a superb atmosphere. And just one more story, if I can, on the Olympic Games. Yeah. It was Super Saturday, and the Team GB had an outstanding Olympic Games. They won 29 gold, not so good in the team sports, but outstanding in individual sports. And on this Super Saturday, they won 2 rowing, 1 cycling, and went on to win 8 cycling in general. Chris Hoy dominated. And they won 3 track and field, including Mo Farah in the 10,000. He won the 5,000 a little bit later on. Greg Rutherford in the long jump and Jess Ennis in the heptathlon. And I had a day off. I caught up with friends at Covent Gardens, and I thought I'll go into the Olympic Stadium and just have a look. I went down and watched the Dream Team play the basketball. I went and watched the hockey. And, of course, the basketball was the bottom stadium. The hockey was the next stadium. Then you had the supermarket or the shopping centre that Frank Lowy owned, the Australian who got John Farnham over and paid him an obscene amount of money to have him come over and do the Australian team dinner. At the opening of the Australian campaign, it was fantastic. They just blew Glenn Wheatley out of the water with the money that they offered Frank Lowy. So that was nearby. And then I made my way to about halfway. I wanted to get to the Olympic Stadium and watch some of the events. And I saw all these people milling around a television on a mound. And I thought, what's going on here? And I looked up on the television, and it was the soccer. And they were playing South Korea. It was a knockout. As you know, only 4 players over the age of 23 can represent a nation in Olympic soccer. One of the players I recognised had the greying hair was Ryan Giggs, the Manchester United star, was in that England team. And they were in penalty shootouts, and it was silent. There were people everywhere watching. And, of course, guess what? They lost. And people were throwing their hats at the scarce. They were crying. They were devastated. And I said to a bloke as I walked away with him, I said, mate, I'm Australian. I know you guys love your soccer. We love our AFL over in Australia. But you've just had the best day ever. You've won 6 gold medals at the Olympic Games, number of silver. You've absolutely killed. It's called Super Saturday. You'll never do what you've done today. You are blitzing. I mean, the soccer team did okay. And he said, laddie, I won't give you a Northern English accent because I can't do it even though I love it. He said, it doesn't matter. There's only one sport that matters in this country, and we've been no good in internationals for a long, long time, and that's the football team. And then he walked away, and all these people walking away saying how hopeless they were. I couldn't believe it. Thought they've just had the greatest day ever, Damo. Yet the soccer team didn't win, so it didn't matter. Unbelievable. But it was a great experience. I loved every single minute of it. We were near the Thames. I could run there with my great mate Charlie King every day, and we'd go down to Hyde Park because we had to get to know the triathlon course, which was terrific. We did that. So that was really good. And I think I called generally pretty well. I got my head around most of the sports I did. I felt like I called well. Again, the proof's in the pudding about what other people said. I didn't hear too many adverse comments, certainly to my face anyway. But yeah, I just loved it. And I really thought that I belonged and I'd found my way. And it was nice to put a good one together after being disappointed in the previous one in 2004, 8 years earlier.
What about the tennis, Dan? Quite topical as we record the Australian Opens on at the moment. You covered many Australian Open campaigns and also the Davis Cup back when it had a big profile. You talk to us about your memories covering the Australian Open. I get the feeling a certain match that went until the early hours, in fact, probably the later hours of the morning, it was that long, stands out as a great memory.
Well, I was very lucky, Damo, because most of my time at the Australian Open tennis, I did 14 for the ABC. I did also half of the 2015 one I did with the ABC. Also did with the World Feed Television. 3 more with the World Feed Television, being one of the link men, one of the hosts, after the great Gary Wilkinson, who's an interesting bloke. When you get to know him, Wilco, he's a fantastic fella. I found him that anyway. And then I did one in 2021 with AO Radio. So I've done a lot of Australian Opens. And for most of the time, my time at the Australian Open coincided with the greatest sports person I've ever seen. I mean, I know that at the time of doing this particular podcast, might be a chance of winning his 25th. Okay, that's a great effort. He's won 10 Australian Opens. Wonderful player. But Roger Federer is the best I've ever seen. And I remember seeing him in my first Australian Open 2002, and he was a bit mentally fragile. He took on Tommy Haas in a rain-affected match, and at his best, he was far too good for Haas, but he was a bit inconsistent. But 2003, there's a couple of big moments here. Davis Cup, Switzerland and Australia, semi-final in Melbourne. It's also calling the footy as well, so I was pretty busy. And we called the tennis on the Friday, and Federer managed to beat Philippoussis. Leighton Hewitt beat Cratchiville. And then they had the doubles on the Saturday while the footy was on, and Port Adelaide went down. Or was it Adelaide? Just trying to think. No, it was Port Adelaide. They went down to Collingwood 2003 after they also blew that final to Sydney the week before. They just had this propensity to drop the first week of the finals, Port. So they were out.
Yep.
And I'd seen a few Port Adelaide supporters on the way to the tennis, and they were obviously very, very forlorn. And I said, well, maybe Leighton Hewitt, being a South Australian, can get you over the line. So it's Federer and Hewitt. But the day before in the doubles, Rosset and Federer played together. And Rosset was the playing captain for the Switzerland team against Arthurs and Woodbridge. And they won the first 2 sets of the Swiss. And then they ran out of gas. And Arthurs and Woodbridge won the next 3. And Australia had the advantage 2-1. So we're going into the final day, myself and Quentin Hull calling with Jeff Masters. And it was all about Hewitt and Federer playing first. And Leighton had won a Grand Slam, and he was number 1 in the world. And Roger had just won Wimbledon, and he was about to become the best player that we've ever seen. But there probably was still some doubts about him. And he played a lot of tennis in the previous 2 days. And in the first set, he won comfortably. In the second set, he absolutely blew Leighton away. It was one of the best sets of tennis I've ever seen in all the tennis I've watched. And in those days, you could see the practice courts out the back of the commentary box up in the super boxes. Went out there, and Philippoussis was working very, very hard out in the back there with the Australian team, going through his paces, knowing that it was very likely that very soon he'd be on trying to win that last tie against Cratchiville and get Australia a spot in the final of the Davis Cup later that year. And because Leighton Hewitt was in trouble. In the third set, it was still all Roger. And then Leighton just got the crowd on his side. He started pumping them up, come on, and Roger started to make some errors. He wasn't going through his service games as easily. He wasn't hitting the forehands, that beautiful backhand as well. Leighton Hewitt got out of jail in a tiebreak. It was an unbelievable set of tennis. And Roger looked cooked. And he was gone during the break for a long time. And I actually thought if he was gone to the toilet, he might have even fallen in, Damo. I thought they were going to have to get the plumbers out and go and find him. That's how long he was gone. But he came back out, and he looked cooked. He was pretty good in the fourth set for a while, and then he was cooked in the fifth. And the longer the match went on, the less we saw Philippoussis out on the outside courts practicing, and Leighton Hewitt got them home. The other match you're talking about, Australia eventually went on to win the Davis Cup later that year in 2003. The other match you're talking was 2008. And that was Australian Open, of course. Roger Federer played Janko Tipsarevic, who's now a politician in his home country. And it was the third match on centre court, and Roger wasn't all that well. And it was the day session. As you might know, there's always 3 matches on the day session. It was the middle Saturday. And then they've got to clear everyone out and get them ready for the night session. So they normally need half an hour to 45 minutes to do all the cleaning and then get people ready for the night session. This match was going a fair while. There were long sets too, and Roger was battling a bit. And Tipsarevic took a set off him and took another set off him. 5 o'clock turned to 6 o'clock, turned to 6:30, turned to 7. I thought, gee, this is going to be late. And I've gone down, and the last set went, I think, 16-14, so it went forever. So I went an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. So I've gone downstairs and gone into the Rod Laver Arena in the outside area before they go into the actual court itself. And there are people everywhere, bodies strewn all over the place, Damian. And I thought, this will be very, very late. Anyway, they eventually got off court. I checked this with Brett Phillips the other day, and I think they got off court about 9:30, 9:45. And they should have then, with the greatest respect, moved the Venus Williams-Sonia Mirza match onto the John Cain Arena. I think it was the days before the Margaret Court Arena. And but she said, no, I'm on centre court. I need to play in centre court. So they bowed to Venus. She came out and played and won in over an hour. So it was well after 10 before they got on. Might have been a bit longer than that. By the time Baghdadis and Hewitt got on, it was 11:45. So myself and Jared called it, and I thought this could go forever because neither of them play short rallies. Neither of them know how to win in straight sets, and they are prone to have lapses in matches. It's just the way they play. And Leighton was 5-1 up in the fourth, and you thought, well, this will be over soon. Whoever was getting in front, you wanted them to win because it was at 2 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock. Leighton blew that set, went into a fifth. And I made my famous comment or infamous comment. Matt Clinch and Jared were there, and I hadn't been all that well the previous year, so I was a bit uncomfortable with life, but I think I was calling okay. And I made a comment, and I said, for those that have just joined us, and Jared said, for those that have just joined us, where have they joined us from, Dan? I said, well, they might have just left the nightclubs, Jared. They might have got into a taxi, or mum and dad's picked them up at, 3:30 in the morning. I'll be telling them to get a taxi. Yeah, they might get in the taxi and they might be listening to the radio. I doubt it. I said, oh, well, come on, Jared. It's 3:30, 3:45 in the morning. Anyway, we finished at 25 past 4. By the time we'd done all our summaries, it was 10-5. And I'm
of course.
Yeah, in the morning, and I've got in the queue for the taxi. Saw some people in front of me. Dan, you've been calling the tennis all night. We've been here all night. I've had a great time. The first time in my life, or in 25 years, that I've been drinking champagne at 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, good luck to you. I haven't had one yet. I'll probably go home and have a beer, but my wife and 2 small kids will be home pretty early, so I won't have much chance. Do you want to come and join us for brekkie? I said, no, I'm all right. Thanks, guys. Anyway, I got home, and then the call started for the morning shift in regard to reviews. And they all got onto me because they couldn't get onto anyone else. So I was doing reviews till 8:39. Then I asked Drew, and of course the big story had already started about why they allowed that match to go on. But that was amazing. But the other match that always stands out for me, Monica Seles beating Venus Williams in 2002. I loved her when she had a really good run in the tournament. She just absolutely destroyed her, and I had tears in my eyes at the end of that because I didn't know whether she'd ever come back. And even at 29, she was still playing great tennis after what had happened to her when I thought she's going to be the greatest of all time. And Roger Federer, getting a bit ahead of himself, at match point against Marat Safin the year that Leighton Hewitt made the final and got beaten. I called that final as well. But I called that semi between Roger and Marat Safin. And Roger had the match point, and he went for that little low percentage shot through his legs and hit the net. And that was the only match point he got. And Marat Safin was at his best and did very, very well. So I had some great moments at the tennis. Loved every single minute of it. A bit jealous I'm not there now because it's a great tournament. Paul McNamee was the one that changed the tournament. The ground pass has been one of the great
Yes.
inventions in the history of watching sport. You get an opportunity to go and look at a number of different courts. You can go to, of course, the People's Court, John Cain Arena, as it's so rightly named after the former Victorian Premier, and you just have a chance to have a wonderful day. It's a huge event now, and may it continue. But it was one of the great sporting highlights of my broadcasting career, calling the Australian Open for many years, Damian.
Who were some of the tennis experts you worked with there?
I worked with some rippers. Liz Smiley was a beauty. Such a lovely person. Mark Woodford, Ross Case, the snake, Jeff Masters, who was his doubles partner at the Davis Cup for many years. Josh Eagle, who knows so much about the sport of tennis, being a player and especially a very good coach. His wife, Barbara Shedd, who's a lovely, lovely person. It was wonderful calling with her. Louise Fleming was another one we called a bit of tennis with as well. Mark Harawati, who's a hitting partner of Venus Williams, called some tennis with him. So we've had some great commentators over the years. John Newcomb, who was very good at it. Paul McNamee. I mean, you're with royalty when you've got those two with you. Just turn up and they have notes in front of them, and they just know everything that's going on. They were great commentators. Peter Johnston is a good mate of mine as well as the tournament organiser. He's organised a lot of tournaments over the years, and a journeyman too, Peter, and a great fella as well. So I've been very, very lucky over the years to work with some wonderful people in tennis. My mother loved the sport when I was growing up, so it was very important to us, and we knew all about the history of the tennis. Judy Dalton's another one. Just loved to talk to her. I loved her, and Mum knew her in particular from watching her win all those doubles titles as Judy took out in the 60s with the great Margaret Court. So she was a wonderful player and was from the previous era of ABC tennis with Clark Hansen and Doug Hayward. It was wonderful that we could have her remain part of our team when we came back to do it, some 10, 11, 12 years later.
And I just wanted to touch on cricket if I could. I know we've been going for quite a while, but it's been such a jam-packed career. You did a lot of first-class cricket, and I'm just trying to think, did you work around the time when David Hooks died, covering the cricket? Did you do that last game that he coached?
Oh, I did. Yeah, look, I knew Hooksy pretty well. I called some footy with him. 5RPH, which was the radio for the print handicapped over in Adelaide. They called some matches when they allowed the community stations to call. It was the last year in 1995. Bulldog Radio was there. I did some matches for them as well. And 6NR, which was probably a little bit more than a community station. It was almost a semi-professional, for want of a better expression, station run by Peter Vlahos and Colin Minson. So they called matches as well. So I called with Hooksy and got to know him through that. And then obviously got to know him when he came to Victoria. And I got on pretty well with him. He used to give me a hard time, but Hooksy was that style of person where he would rag you, probably a bit like Tony Jones. Maybe doesn't go as far as Tony Jones. I mean, at the end of the day, you can get a bit sick and tired of people teasing you. It can go so far, but Hooksy knew how far to go with me, and I always got on really well with David. He was really good for Victorian cricket. He had them play with freedom, had enough talent in that side to go a fair way, and that's the way he played. I think he probably should have played a lot more Test cricket, but he wasn't a great player of spin, and I think playing World Series cricket might have stopped him from playing more Test cricket, ironically, even though he's one of the big names there. But yeah, look, he was great for the Victorian team, and I got to know the Victorian players well because I would do their cricket all the time. I'd go down and get interviews. They got to know me. I'd even attend a couple of training sessions. They'd try and teach me to get your arm up, Dan, you idiot. Learn how to bowl properly. But they were great blokes, and I did all the one-day internationals, which was a good experience. Would love to have done one test or even one 20-minute session of a test match, but that's probably passed me by. You can't do everything, but we had some great callers that I was never going to usurp. Jim Maxwell, Tim Lane, Glenn Mitchell, Drew Morfitt, even Neville Oliver at the start of my ABC career that were there. So I was never going to get that opportunity. They were more experienced and much better cricket commentators than me. I mean, it's a very technical sport, cricket, but I think the longer it's gone on for me and the more I've called, the better I've got. And I love the anecdotal aspect of it, that you've got to get your ducks in a row and be talking about a number of different topics and be prepared. I mean, you also need to take the attitude when you have someone like Kerry O'Keefe in the box with you. it could go anywhere. You need to understand his jokes and his sense of humour and everything like that. And for a couple of minutes, there might be mayhem. And then you've got to be able to readjust and get back to concentrating on the job at hand. If you've got someone like Peter, the late, great Peter Roebuck with you, you've got to be well prepared and know your stuff. If you don't know your stuff, it's going to be a hard 15, 20 minutes with Peter Roebuck, but he loves Zimbabwean cricket. He loved the laws of the game. He loved the politics of the game. And if you were well prepared, and I remember the first time I worked with him, I was pretty nervous, but I'd done my homework on Zimbabwean cricket, and I think there'd just been a little bit happening there at the time. And I said, will it ever get back to the way it was in the late 90s, Peter? I said, gee, Dan, no one's really asked me that question for a long time. They were very good in the 90s, but they were all made up of white Zimbabwean cricketers. We want to see more black Zimbabwean cricketers, but it's very tough at the moment with the current regime, even though it's obviously at the time it was a black regime, Robert Mugabe, and it wasn't a nice place to be in. But he was very open about how it was and how it could be and how it should be, and it was a fascinating 20 minutes. And then you go back on the game and he'd talk about, I don't like what's happening here, I don't like what's happening there, and you'd say, well, why is that, Peter? And you'd feel more comfortable every time you'd work with him. And at the end of it, he said, that was well done, Dan. And that made me feel good to be validated by a guy who had his difficulties, and a lot of people thought he was difficult to talk to, difficult to have a conversation with. But if you were able to be on his level, that was very important. I mean, to watch Glenn Mitchell and Jim, who are so laid back, and Tim work with him and broadcast with him, I learned a lot from them. Certainly, as I say again, I was not in their level in cricket or being able to wax lyrical with a Peter Roebuck or even a Kerry O'Keefe or the other good commentators we had, Stacky, but I was able to learn to reach a certain level. You've got to try and be yourself, of course, as a broadcaster, Damian, but to reach a certain level. And I learned a lot from those gentlemen about how to do that.
Who are some of the Victorian cricketers you got along with?
Nick Jewell, I still see a lot of now, involved in local sport. He coaches the East Brighton Vampires in the Southern Football League. He's involved with the South Caulfield cricket team, very successful cricket team in the Southern Bayside turf competition. Nick and I have always been good mates. He has done a bit of broadcasting with the ABC, and I've sort of helped him out with that. Mark Ridgway was a great mate of mine. I don't see as much of Ridgie now, but we used to call all the time. He's a very funny man, Ridgie, great to work with. Chris Rogers was one I liked. Brad Hodge I got on pretty well with. Andrew McDonald there for a period. Most of them I had a bit to do with. Rob Quiney was another one I liked. One of the coaches, Simon Helmet. Damien Wright, ripping fella. We used him to do some broadcasting. He was great too. So I had a pretty good relationship with most of them. Dirk Nannis, Greg Shippard. They're always happy enough to talk to me. You've got to develop relationships. You've got to get to know people. And if you're friendly to them, they'll be friendly to you. Again, you don't try and put them on a pedestal. They're just normal people, but they can do something that you can't do. They can play sport at a high level. But it was good to get to know them and be able to get interviews with them and delve into their life a bit more. I mean, when I say into their life, don't get too much into their private lives, but outside their cricket, how they got into the game, what they love about the game, what they do outside the game. And they're really good people to get to know. So I've been very lucky in that area too, Damien.
We're speaking with Dan Lonergan on Dashy Dan's Sporting Adventures for KISS Professional Solutions. Just a few more before I let you go, Dan. You worked at the ABC for almost 2 decades. How devastated were you when you got the call to say that you were no longer required? I know there were budget cuts towards the end of 2014. You officially finished there in early 2015. Is it something that still bothers you today?
Oh, it does. It bothers me. It still bothers me. I still love to do it. I still apply for jobs. My 12 months is up. It was up in 2016. When you get a redundancy, you have to wait 12 months, and I've continually applied for jobs that I thought I could get. I think realistically, they're not going to look at me now. I was described as a 20th century broadcaster. One of the reasons why I missed a job, I knew someone new in people and learning. And I said, I don't even understand what that means. I mean, most of my work nowadays is in social media. If that's what it is all about, social media, which he obviously does a lot of nowadays, I'd love to do it, and it sticks in my craw that I'm not doing it, but I've got to try and move on. I think I'm better with that than I was. I was very bitter early days. I had some mental health issues that didn't help me, and I think I knew even before the decision was made on that fateful day in the middle of November, a Monday morning, after I'd done that dreadful digital shift, breakfast shift, which didn't help me too much. But I think they knew that it wasn't going to help me too much. I found it a bit tiring, but anyway, I turned up, did the shift to the best of my ability. But I knew even before, I mean, they told you on the weekend that you had to come to a meeting on Monday. So we all knew what it was about. There's only three of us that lost our jobs in sport, myself, Peter and Drew. And I think that was a bit unfair because Melbourne at the time was the sporting capital and probably still is. You look at all the stuff they're doing at the moment, and they're gone from the Test cricket to the T20 Big Bash cricket to the tennis, and now the footy starts in a month's time. You can't tell me that they need more than two full-time broadcasters, or as they called them, generalists. They wanted two full-time broadcasters and two seasonal broadcasters that called football in winter and cricket in summer. What did Drew and I do? We called cricket in summer and football in winter, and tennis as well. So I didn't quite understand that. And there are other broadcasters, with the greatest respect, I won't mention any names, who worked for other parts of Australia, but were probably not specifically broadcasters or producers. They're a bit of both, but they kept their jobs. So there was only three. So you can look at that any way you like as to why they just targeted the three of us. And that was hard. It was very hard. But I mean, I knew on the Monday, when I went into the meeting didn't go very well. I was in there with a lady that I didn't get on with, who shouldn't have been in there, which fueled the situation. And I fought very hard for a long time because, just briefly on this, Damian, if you are made redundant in most workplaces, they say you're out straight away. Hand over your work pass. If you've got a company car, hand over the keys, hand over the key to your desk. Leave all the intellectual property that belongs to us in your computer and be out the door by lunchtime, or you'll be escorted out by security. But the ABC had this silly thing where it was a consultation process. You're allowed three of those. And the first consultation process I had was, well, what's a generalist? And then I had my union rep with me, and they've said to me straight away, or she said to me straight away, how many work in the department? And they were all in Sydney the day of the Lint siege, and pretty busy, and you can hear them shuffling their papers. And I put the phone, we were on a conference call in Melbourne, I put the phone on hold and silence, and my union rep said, what are you doing? I said, I don't think they know how many work there. And she said, well, how can they get rid of it? And they didn't. So that delayed it, and it delayed it again after Christmas. At the end of the day, it wasn't good for my mental health because I suffered a nervous breakdown after all my work in other areas such as Triple M and 3BA and a few other places. NIRS ended at the end of the 2015 footy season. I had a nervous breakdown. So I probably should have got out straight away or even earlier, but I was looking for other jobs, hoping other jobs might come up. One, to be a media representative for the new state government at the time. I thought I had a job, but I didn't do a very good interview with John Aaron, the man I was going to work for, the then sports minister. And so I just had a bit of part-time work, but once it all ran out, I suffered a nervous breakdown, and I was that doped up, Damo. I missed probably the most famous Melbourne Cup of all time, Pirate of Penzance, winning for Michelle Payne in 2015. So that was a tough time for me. And obviously, if it ever happens again, which I hope it doesn't, I would handle it a lot differently. But it still sticks in my craw. You feel rejected. You feel you weren't helped. But at the end of the day, it was 10 years ago. And hopefully, if we do this again in another 10 years' time, that it'll just be memory of my distant past. But it still hurts, unfortunately.
How come? So you worked with Triple M for a year in the NIRS as well.
Yep.
Did they think about keeping you on at Triple M? Because you did the Sydney games, of course. I remember I was a youngster at the time working at Woolworths, and I drive into this. I remember you calling a West Coast v Sydney match, Dan. And I know that voice. You were calling a West Coast v Sydney game when I was on my way to my Woolworths shift. But yeah, how come that didn't go any further?
I'm not sure. I thought it went quite well. As I said, I never heard from Lee Simon that I wasn't doing a good job. I mean, that was an interesting game too, because we did that from the studio. And my brother had picked me up and he came and we showed him around. He'd never seen a footy match done from the studio. And then he went home and listened to it. And he said, "Oh, I see they've increased it. They've increased the difference between the TV and your sound." I said, "Yeah, well, I think we're on real sound or whatever." But yeah, I did a number of games that year from Sydney. And I loved every minute of it. I worked with Brad Seymour, who's one of the best blokes you want to know in footy. He played, of course, in Sydney's 1996 grand final. Good commentator, and Jude Bolton as well. And a young bloke called Liam Flanagan, who's now calling regularly, I think, for Triple M in Brisbane. So, look, I called in 2015, some matches in 2016 for Adelaide, Vinnie Shannon and the boys, Warren Treadray, Chris Dittmar. That was a good experience. Mark Rasciuto's a ripper. Some matches in 2017 as well. But, look, I think that they felt that they had their broadcasters, and Barry Dennis, one of the best. He just has taken it to a duck to water. He's a magnificent caller, the caller of the people. Baz, they love him. And now they've got Tim Solly with the big voice from the Essendon District Football League, and they've got Jack Heffron. So they've got enough of those sort of callers. I was never, Lee never said why. I think that they also wanted Joey Montagna, and they wanted Nathan Brown, and Mark Howard had a high profile being in television. It was all about personalities, and I probably didn't fit that bill, even though I thought I fitted in okay there. But I loved it. It took me a couple of games to remember for McDonald's Triple M Rocks footy, and to remember the sponsors, to get down to for Bob Jane T-Marts and all that sort of thing. Once I got the hang of that, because you didn't have any of that at the ABC, and a few of them had listened to me. If you'd have gone from the ABC and say, "Gee, Dan, it's taking a little while," I said, "Yeah, it is." Because when I first heard Tim Lane do it on 3AW, he was uncomfortable too. It took him a while as well. I mean, it's foreign. When you've worked for an organisation like the ABC, and Gerard Healy once said, "I worry for you, Dan," and I think he was being nice about it, that I was a bit institutionalised. So I had a sound of an ABC broadcaster, having worked there for a long time. When you work for the ABC and you're not used to throwing to ads, or you're not used to mentioning, I mean, I do a lot of it now, so I am very used to it now. And you're not used to promoting a sponsor like you do at a Triple M or even an NIRS or an SEN or other stations that I've worked for commercially. It takes a while to get used to it, because at the ABC, the only break we had was a promo, or you'd go to news, and then you'd come back. At Triple M, you get 3 or 4 minutes, or 3AW, you'd get 3 or 4 minutes. You've worked at SEN for a long time, you'd probably even get more. You might get 4 or 5 ad breaks an hour. So that took me a while, and I think my style was okay. I think I called okay. It was a bit different to what they had. Wayne Schwass was a great call to call with. He was so giving, and he might be one of the best ex-players to ever call a game of footy, in my humble opinion. Outstanding caller. And he decided, he's an interesting guy, Schwatter. When he's had enough, he's had enough. And obviously he's concentrating on his mental health causes, and we wish him all the best there. But he was a terrific caller, and I learned a lot from him. And Campbell Brown was another guy, good bloke to work with too. And Troy Luff, and Jude Bolton, as I said, they were good guys. It was totally different setup, but I just felt relaxed, because you turn up, do your job, go home, turn up again, do your job, go home. And I've got out of the politics, which I think wrecked me at the ABC. And for any young listener or young budding sports broadcaster out there, if you want to have a career in the media, just do your job. It's the greatest job in the world. You're very lucky to do it. Just do your job, and wherever your bed lies, let it lie. And if you manage to get to the top, great. If you're halfway there, you're halfway there. At least you're still doing it. And that's something that I've learnt over a long period of time. And I think working at Triple M certainly helped me realise that.
Second last question, Dan. You and I worked together, funnily enough, at a couple of places. One was Eon Sports Radio, which is a story in itself. I think the whole experience. It lasted for about 10 months at the end, I reckon.
Yeah,
which,
it did.
was very interesting. And obviously Cricket Australia as well. We did a bit of work together, WBBL and the under-19s. Talk to us about the Eon Sports Radio. You had a day shift, I think Monday to Friday, didn't you? And you called a bit of A-League as well. What are your memories when we worked there at Eon Sports, as fleeting as they were?
It was disorganised.
Yep.
They went back the front, in my humble opinion. They should have put the station in place first, had your sponsors in place next, had your marketing organised, and then got the easy part done last. And the easy part, I know then you've got to market your on-air product, and maybe you do your on-air and then your marketing. You do it all together. But by getting the on-air talent, Jack, who was very good, Cam Luke, who reaches a certain audience with his style, which is he's very much a sports fan. Cam, he's a different sort of broadcaster. He gets very passionate and excited about things. He's not the normal broadcaster. He's a sports fan. He loves it, and that's great. You need to have different people doing it. And then you had me, who was quite serious, doing the longer interviews, which certainly suited me. Now we're all in place early before there was a proper plan in place, and they were still looking for an investor, and they got an investor, but it didn't really work, and the money ran out pretty quickly. But we had a lot of ideas, and I loved the show. I loved working with Luke Dottermay. We came up with some wonderful guests.
Yes.
With the footy, I mean, the Bulldogs made the grand final. That was a great year, and I went and interviewed a lot. As Luke said at the time, this is the 90s show with all the football guests they had on, the Scotty Wines of the world, Todd Curley, Peter Quill, Brad Seymour, Mark Browning, all those wonderful people in the lead up to the Bulldogs Sydney grand final. And I remember I got Brad Hardy on, and every week he was tipping the Dogs. I'm thinking, no way. And every week he got it right. Had him on the first week, had him on the second week. He'd ring me up and say, you better get me on this week if we're going to win, mate. All right, you're on. And then we had him on the last week as well in the lead up to the grand final. So I had some good guests as well from the contacts that I'd managed to garner at the ABC. So I enjoyed it, and it was terrific. But you could tell early in 2017 that it was already running out of steam, that we were running out of money, that we couldn't get another investor after the first investor had fallen over. And when you're working for nothing for 2 or 3 weeks, you just can't keep doing that. I mean, I was at a stage in my career where I was well past that aspect. When you're first starting, you're happy to do it for nothing. And I think you were doing it for nothing for a bit, Damo, but you're at a stage in your career and your university.
Pretty much the entire time, Ben.
Yeah, where you needed to start getting something from it because you wanted to make it a career. I mean, I was well past that. So I needed to make it a career. So Coach and I were the last 2 people in the building. When the last shift was a breakfast shift, Cam had taken over the breakfast shift with Richie Callender, who was a character in himself. He then said that I have decided that that'll be it. And I really didn't have a show organised, and I didn't have a producer because the coach couldn't get there. He was working until a bit later. I said, well, I really haven't got a producer, and I can't really do a great deal. I could talk for an hour, but people will turn off within a minute unless someone wants to stay with me. We'll pull the pin. So we did. And it was sad because it had potential. And I think today it would have thrived. And we even caught some basketball as well out of the studio. And that was great with Liam Santa Maria. He got his start with us. Michelle Timms did a bit, Chris Anstey. But when you start asking those stars to come in and do it for nothing, and then you're not paying them, I mean, it is fraught with danger. So that was a great experience. And then, of course, the WBBL I've loved. I think it's a wonderful product. Watching that Australian women's team in cricket is why the WBBL is so successful. I know that we get a lot of good players from overseas as well, but we have the best women's cricketers in the world, and they keep winning, and that's why it's a good product. And the under-19s was great. Not many of those Pakistan boys. I mean, Shansha Afridi has, although he's out of the team at the moment, have kicked on. A few of the Australians, Mackenzie Harvey, Aaron Hardy, Will Sutherland was playing matches in the lead up to the World Cup. There were a few there, but and they're still sort of finding their way. But I think the Pakistanis, who normally have a lot of guys that start young, would be a bit disappointed that particular batch didn't kick on. And of course, on the third day, the great Wasim Akram turns up, and all the boys get up and they treat him like a king, of which he was, Damo.
Exactly right. And lastly, Dan, you're heavily involved in local sport. What's your read on grassroots sport in the state that it's in at the moment in Australia?
I think it's pretty good. I think that there are some wonderful competitions. I'm with the MPFNL, and they attract very, very good players. They manage to keep under the points, and I think they keep under the salary cap. And they've got a great relationship with their netball clubs too. There was a period there where there was both the netball and the football clubs, not only the MPFNL, but a lot of other clubs were separate entities, especially I suppose, outer suburban, semi-rural leagues like the MPFNL. I mean, the country leagues have always had this close affiliation between the football and netball clubs. I think it's going pretty well. I think that we're now getting many more people getting involved in helping their clubs out as volunteers. I think there was a period there just before COVID where I think people were getting tired of it. After COVID, I think that people have found other interests. But now that footy is back and it's a huge part of what you do on a Saturday, more people are getting involved, whether it be with the senior team on a Saturday, the netball program, just working behind the bar, which is a great part of it, or on Sunday, of course, with the junior sport. And you have to congratulate all the clubs because they went through a difficult period in 2020 and for half of 2021 when COVID wiped out one season and half wiped out 2021. Their main source of income, other than the gate, which is an okay source of income, but the main source of income, of course, is the occasional luncheons they have, and then, of course, the social festivities later on with the bar prices. They weren't getting any of that, but now they've sort of all got back on track. So full credit to those clubs, and I think grassroots footy is going really well. You're seeing a lot of ex-AFL players go and play, particularly with the suburban clubs, which indicates that they're attractive to want to go back and play maybe with your old club or with another club from that league or a completely different league, which is fantastic. And I know that the MPFNL in recent years have had anywhere between 15 and 20 AFL, VFL ex-players playing in that competition. And that just indicates why it's such a great league and why there are so many other great leagues around. But again, it has a lot to do with the volunteers, Damo, and they play such a big part. And without them, we'd obviously be struggling.
No doubt about that. Well, Dan, really appreciate your time talking about your career. It's been a two-parter. There's been a lot that's been packed into the last 25 to 30 years of your career. And it's a great pleasure for someone who grew up listening to you and idolised you as a 9 or 10-year-old. It's been a great privilege. We've done it for KISS Professional Solutions. They have offices in Carrum Down, Sydney, Shepparton, Albury and Gippsland. They service Wagga from their Albury office as well. Dan, thanks very much.
Good on you, Damo, and thanks to John McEncrow and the crew for jumping on board. And, of course, you can get KISS on 1300 KISS PS or 547777 or www.kissps.com.au. Thanks so much for taking so much time to have a chat to this old fella, and I've really enjoyed it. For those who would like to listen to it, you can get it on Spotify. All the best.